Bobby, what are you doing up at this hour? Bobby, you've been dreaming again.
Still don't know what it is or where it comes from, but there's something there. Where'd you see all this, Bobby?
Transmitting live from Planet X. It's the Live from Planet X podcast. I'm your host, Zaire, the Planet X ambassador. Tonight's special guest is the publisher of the world's leading alternative news magazine, Nexus. Marcus Allen is with us here tonight. So make yourself a spot of tea, kick back and watch the moon landing footage, do whatever you gotta do. Just keep it locked to the Live from Planet X podcast. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Live from Planet X podcast. Today's guest is the UK publisher of Nexus Magazine, which he introduced to the UK in 1994 and to the world. Nexus is the world's leading alternative news magazine covering health, future science, hidden history, the unexplained, and UFOs. Nexus originates from Australia and is now sold in over 100 countries, including the USA and Canada, and goes way out there in outer space. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Marcus Allen is with us here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Allen. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and hopefully we can encourage people to examine the famous Apollo moon landings in more detail, because they've come into the news recently. President Trump has just said, we will return to the moon by 2024. I wonder if they'll make it, because they didn't make it the first time. So I don't know what this return to the moon business is all about. And if you say, what's he talking about? Didn't go to the first time. I've seen the pictures, I've seen the films, I've read the books. I've heard the astronauts talk about it. What's he talking about? That's what we're here to explain. And we'll start at the beginning.
Yes, and I was checking out some of the links that you sent me, and I was looking over some stuff, and I see stuff on TV and documentaries and things on YouTube and things of that nature. I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the overall reason why they would even want to fake the moon landing in concept? Now, I'm thinking, was it more like because they couldn't do it and they had something to prove? Or did they really go there, but they just show us the fake stuff? What do you think?
I think we need to go back to the beginning when it all started. This was with that magnificent president, John Kennedy. In 1961, it was only 4 months after he was inaugurated. He had to deal with the Bay of Pigs, which was a bit of a fiasco. And 4 months after he was inaugurated, he had to deal with the information that the Soviet Union, as it was called then, it's called the Russian Federation now. Let's just refer to them as the Russians generally. The Russians had launched Yuri Gagarin into Earth orbit, which was a bit of a surprise. America were now seen to be second in the space race. Now, it is important to note that America don't have the option of coming second to anybody in any race, let alone the space race. So President John Kennedy made his announcement in May 1961, we will land a man on the moon before the decade is out and return him safely to the Earth. That was his promise. At that point, only one American had been into space. That was Alan Shepard. He'd been up for 15 minutes and come straight back down again. So nobody knew how they could do it. Going to the moon? How do you go to the moon? So they had to find out, and they had to set about constructing all the equipment that was needed, constructing all the telemetry that was going to be needed, and making sure that they had all the information available to them to enable them to land man on the moon. And up until the time, my estimate is it was around the time of the Apollo 1 fire, the disastrous fire which killed 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, in January 1967. Up to that point, there was no doubt that they were aiming for the moon and they were going to go there. It was going to be a close-run thing. They'd cut some corners. Famous remark by Neil Armstrong. So we're going to be launched on a rocket made by the lowest bidder, which was the way it worked at the time. he wasn't entirely sure that it was going to be successful. Having decided that they were going to go to the moon, they had to be seen to have done it, because this is now the mid-1960s, approaching the end of the 1960s, and there were lots of other things going on. There was a space race going on, which is what this is about. There was the Cold War going on. This is the standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. The whole nuclear weapon fiasco, that was all going on. There was a lot of other things. And then the Vietnam War was going on. That was turning very, very unpleasant. By the end of the 1960s, the My Lai, I hope I got that pronunciation right, My Lai massacre in 1968, where American forces killed 500 Vietnamese civilians. It was disastrous. The whole thing was completely getting out of control. Students were being shot dead on American campuses. It was turning very unpleasant. We also had Robert Kennedy being killed. We had, sorry, my phone. We had Martin Luther King being assassinated, Malcolm X being assassinated. America was falling apart. Something had to be done to try to ensure that it got back on track. And the space race was deemed to be the best. That was the good news. Everything else was bad news. If America could land a man on the moon by the end of the decade, i.e. the end of 1969, which wasn't very far ahead, then everything would be okay. And that's what was seen to be achieved. In December 1968, the Apollo 8 mission was launched to orbit the moon, which it apparently did, and that was when the astronauts on board were reading out from the book of Genesis, and it was all wonderful, and the world was going to be a better place. That is assuming that they actually went there, as reported. And when you see that there had been no previous test done of the Saturn V rocket, the Saturn V rocket was this big 360-foot high, huge construction that was launched. It was certainly launched. There's no doubt about that. It was called the Saturn V because they had 5 engines. Each of those engines generated 1.5 million pounds of thrust, so 7.5 million pounds of thrust for the whole rocket. That's a huge rocket, a very, very powerful rocket, the most powerful rocket there has ever been, up to and including today. Nothing has exceeded it. If it was such a good rocket, why aren't they using it now? Oh, we've lost the plans. Oh, we can't back engineer it because they're all made individually. That's rubbish. Of course you can back engineer something. You find the engines that was used in these rockets, and Jeff Bezos has rescued a couple of those from the bottom of the Atlantic, and they're on display in Seattle now. Back engineer the damn thing. It's not rocket science, kind of phrase. You just have to get on and do it. But no, they're going to build a new rocket. It's called the Space Launch System. And that hasn't even been tested yet. So we're going to return to the moon in 5 years' time? I don't think so, because I don't think they got there the first time. Because where is the evidence? Now, a lot of people are sitting around saying, what is this idiot talking about? He's British. Well, he obviously doesn't know very much. No, I actually know a great deal. And if anybody wants to challenge me on this, I'll be very pleased to have them do so. Because there are so many things which people are just generally unaware of. You need to put the whole thing together. The idea that man has landed on the moon, and we've seen it, wait for this, we've seen it live on television. Oh, come on, get real. How do you transmit a television signal 240,000 miles from the moon through 75 miles of the Earth's atmosphere and pick it up? What power would be required to do that? Ask yourself, what power is required to transmit a television signal today over about 60 miles? About 35,000 kilowatts.
So can I interject? I want to ask you. So you think like even with the Mars rover, like we getting the Mars rover to Mars, I mean, that's way farther than the moon, you know. Do you think that that's possibly fake too somehow? Which I don't think it is. I mean, like you said, everything is broadcast, televised, what we're seeing, our intake of what we see. So do we really know? You know?
What we've seen from Mars, so far as I can tell, and I have no reason to believe it's anything other than what it's portrayed as. Now, there's a major difference here. You're quite right to say that going to Mars, it's 150,000 kilometers away, 90-odd thousand miles when it's on close to the Earth. It's much further than the Moon, certainly. Getting to the Moon with an unmanned craft is not a problem. Getting to Mars with an unmanned craft is not a problem. It's the human aspect of it that I question, because humans are very delicate little creatures.
Do you think it's the Van Allen belts? You think we can't get past the Van Allen belts?
Oh, we can get past them, all right. Rockets can get past them. 5 nations have got past those Van Allen belts and sent unmanned craft to the Moon, to Mars. The Russians are about to do it again. The Chinese are trying it again. The Indians have done it. The Japanese have done it. It's not difficult to go through the Van Allen belts. They aren't a physical barrier. They're just...
It's like radiation would... I thought we couldn't, you know, some people say, I thought it was like high levels of radiation we couldn't get past.
We can get past them, so long as the craft that is going through them are what the technical term is hardened, which means protected, using lead shielding, using gold foil. This will shield against a certain amount of radiation. The problem I always question is getting humans past them or through them. That is the real problem. And NASA acknowledge it. NASA will say it. They have said it many times. One of the major problems we have are the dangers from radiation. Getting humans there, getting spacecraft through them isn't a problem. As I say, they aren't a physical barrier. You could just fly through them. You know, sunlight is not a physical barrier. You can fly through it, but if you sit out in the sun for too long, you could damage your skin. You get sunburn, or you get cancer if you spend too long in it. That's the radiation affecting humans. Excuse me.
No, you're fine. You can take the call. Take the call. I believe I can edit all this. Take your call if you got to. Believe.
Okay. Sorry. I'll if it goes again, I'll answer it. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. If you got to take the call, because I could just chop this and edit that out, so it seemed like it never even happened. So don't worry about it. You know.
All right. That's good. Thanks.
But yeah. But other than that, I'm not going to be chopping out none of the good stuff in the interview, of course.
Sure. Well, you can chop out whatever you like.
No, I'm not going to chop out anything. Watch, you'll see.
Okay.
But you just mentioned the gold foil, like the gold around the craft. One thing I noticed, like in a lot of the Apollo pictures, like when they show the gold, it all looks sparkling, clean, and shiny. And you would think that if that thing landed, it would have kicked up a bunch of moon dust everywhere that would be sitting everywhere. That was one thing that caught my brain when I first seen some pictures like that.
No, that's a very good point. It's exactly, and in fact, if you listen to that famous clip of Apollo 11 landing, and I should say Apollo 11 was just the first to land. There were 5 others after that. As Apollo 11 is landing, and we're hearing it, and Buzz Aldrin is the voice you hear, and he's saying it, I think it's about 40 feet above the lunar surface, kicking up some dust. So he can see it. It's flying about all over the place. Yes, it's quite logical to assume that that dust would then settle on virtually anything around, and including the feet of the lander. But when you see the pictures of it later, there's no dust anywhere, nothing at all. That's one of the anomalies that NASA refuses to address. They will not answer the question. They will not even come anywhere close to it. So there are.
No, go ahead. Believe me, I have like so many questions. Go ahead.
Okay, let's have your questions, because that's going to be interesting.
No, what I was just thinking, what about the stories? I'm sure you've probably heard them, where like Buzz Aldrin said in like some secretive conversations that there were giant spacecraft and beings on the moon that warned them, that told them to get off the moon and to never come back. Have you heard those stories?
I've heard all those stories. It usually involves some sort of outlandish comment. Now, 2 points on that. Every single word spoken by the astronauts from the time they took off to the time they landed is allegedly recorded on the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. So we can see it. And it's recorded on a timeline which has very, very few gaps in it. When I say gaps, maybe they didn't say anything for a minute or two, so there was be a gap of a minute there. There is no indication that they said any of those things. Oh, they're big craft, they're watching us, they've told us to wave the flag, take some rock, get a few pictures and piss off. No, they didn't say that. That is one of those pieces, that's one of those mythological stories which have circulated basically ever since Apollo allegedly landed, because to have seen these big craft on the moon, the implication being they must have got there to see them. And I'm saying they never got there. So obviously I don't go along with the idea that they said, there's a famous story of Neil Armstrong, who's alleged to have said, as he stepped onto the lunar surface after he said his one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, he's alleged to have said, "Good luck, Mr. Gorski." And everybody thought, what's he talking about? Who's Mr. Gorski? There's nobody by that name at NASA. And over the years, they checked out. No, there was no Mr. Gorski who worked for the Russian program. So who was this Mr. Gorski? And eventually somebody came up with the conclusion that Mr. Gorski was Neil Armstrong's family neighbor in Ohio when he was quite a young boy, and he was out in the garden with his brother, and he was throwing the football around, and the football landed in his neighbor's garden. So he crept over and to retrieve the ball, and it had landed just under the window of the neighbor's house. And he heard Mr. and Mrs. Gorski, who were the neighbors, arguing. And Mrs. Gorski was alleged to have said, "Oral sex? You want oral sex? You'll get oral sex when the boy next door lands on the moon." That's the story, which is a music story. It was actually part of a routine, I think, by a very well-known stand-up comic in America about 40 years ago. Can't remember his name now, but that's where that story originated, and it's become part of the folklore of Apollo. And there's all these stories of Buzz Aldrin seeing something traveling alongside their craft, and then you get onto Apollo 12 and you hear stories there that similar things were going on, and you hear stories, basically you hear stories like that. But the whole point of the stories is that it implies they got to the moon to see these UFOs, aliens, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. If they did get to the moon, and if they did see them, I don't think they would be talking about it in that sort of manner. And there's also another story of how they were supposed to have, as they orbited around the moon, because obviously half the time in the orbit around the moon they would be in darkness, so they would see quite well anything around them. And when they came out from behind the radio silence from round the back of the moon, one of the astronauts said, "Please be advised, there is a Santa Claus." And everybody's taken that story to mean, there are UFOs around the back of the moon. Well, maybe there are. Who knows?
Yeah, some people think there's like a moon on the back of the base. Like they say the Nazis might have set up a moon there, a base there or something.
Yeah, I've heard all that. And there's an interesting story behind that as well. Because the Nazis were fairly advanced in certain aspects of research. And if any of your audience has heard of the famous Nazi bell, the Nazi bell is supposed to be something, I think it was in Poland they were doing the test. It's on a facility which looks similar to Stonehenge. It's a circular concrete structure, fairly tall. It's got concrete legs. It's supposed to be on that. And it was supposed to be tethered to this facility so it didn't escape. And it was supposed to be anti-gravity. That's the story.
You know what I think happened to that bell? I think that bell, I don't know, you'd have to see if the time matches up, but I think that bell, that thing that they were working on, was the UFO that crashed in Pennsylvania, the Kecksburg UFO.
Kecksburg, that's right.
They kind of describe it similar in the shape. That's what I think that was.
Yeah, similar in shape and fairly similar in movement as well. But whether there was something called a Nazi bell, I've never seen it. I've seen pictures, representations of it. I've never actually seen the real thing. But have you seen or heard of a book called Alternative 3?
No.
Okay, I can recommend it. It's called Alternative 3. Its author is Leslie Watkins. It was originally a book. It became a television program shown in the UK under a science series called Science Report, and it was a serious report of scientists in Britain who were going missing. This was known back in this is 1978. The book was published, so we're talking a fair while back, and this was the time when scientists were going missing. It was called the brain drain, because many of those scientists were going to America, so they were draining out of Britain because Britain was going through an economic stagnation, and it was a bit unpleasant at the time. Anyway, this science report tried to find out what was happening to them, so they traced them, and there are all sorts of wonderful little cameos in the program of these scientists who were saying, "Well, I knew so and so. I've got the name that they were using. I knew him. He suddenly disappeared, and they found his car parked in a Heathrow Airport car park that had been abandoned. So the scientists had just disappeared." Anyway, the whole point of this story was that Alternative 3 was the third alternative to, this is the mid-1970s, the third alternative to try to resolve the problem of global warming. The first alternative was to blow a hole in the atmosphere to let the heat out. This actually happened. A nuclear bomb was exploded over Johnson Island in the Pacific south of Hawaii, 250 miles above the surface. A nuclear bomb was set off. I mean, how wise is that? This did actually happen, but it obviously didn't work. So they had to go to the second alternative, Alternative 2, which was to build underground bases and tunnels in order that the elite could be secreted away in these underground bases and be protected from the effects of global warming. That was Alternative 2, but they couldn't build them fast enough. Places like Cheyenne Mountain, NORAD headquarters, these are real places. There's no doubt about that. There are many other places. There are some which are more mythological, such as the Dulce base in New Mexico, and the tunnels that are supposed to be under Area 51, which nobody's actually been down, but we assume that there are tunnels there. But
the Denver airport, the connection all underground and all that.
Yeah, all that sort of thing. I mean, we can come on to something about what's going on with the tunnels up to this point in time, because they're a very good way of smuggling things. Anyway, that didn't work. So we have Alternative 3, which is the title of the film and the book. Alternative 3 was to colonize Mars, and by way of the moon, because it's easier to get to Mars if you leave from the moon. The gravity is much less, so you need less fuel, and it's a sort of stop-off point. So the first place would be to build bases on the moon, and this is what was happening. They eventually got to Mars. This is 1962. The colonization of Mars took place, the terraforming of Mars to make it habitable for humans. Anyway, all this was recounted in the film, and it was presented in a very straightforward way, as if it was a sort of detective story to find out what was going on. Now, all this has now become, and it caused quite a stir. I actually watched the program when it was first broadcast in Britain. It was made by a company called Anglia Television, which is East Anglia. It was a real program, and you can still buy copies of it today. Alternative 3 is the name.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out.
It's persuasive. It was very well put together. Now, as to whether it is real or not, People wanted to believe it was real because it was a wonderful story, but it's not. The author of the book and the originator of the storyline from which the television program was taken, Leslie Watkins, he emigrated to New Zealand in the 1980s for whatever reason, and he took with him most of the material. He actually wrote a letter to the magazine that I publish in the UK, Nexus Magazine. He actually wrote a letter saying, it should be noted that I wrote a book of fiction. It was based on fact. I mentioned the nuclear explosions. Those were real. The underground bases, those were real. But beyond that, it was basically fiction. Because the meeting of Russian and American scientists in a nuclear submarine under the North Pole actually did happen, and that's mentioned in the book as well. So there's a lot of real events constructed around a fictional storyline. So the idea that the Nazis had anti-gravity devices and they'd got to the moon derives from that book rather than from reality. I have yet to see any hard, factual, concrete, verifiable evidence that any Germans in the 1940s landed on the moon. I stand to be corrected if somebody can produce the evidence, but as after 25 years of research, I've yet to see it.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? You're talking about, like, you know, you was just mentioning about them colonizing Mars. Have you heard, like, they have secret technology where they don't even need spaceships nor rockets? They just have these teleportation devices, which they call like jump rooms, where they have supposedly have like a secret military's been doing this for probably 40 or 50 years, and they've already been to Mars, people there now, and things of that nature with these teleportation devices.
That is a persistent story, and it goes back to the early 1950s. Teleportation as a means of, it's basically what was portrayed in Star Trek, the teleportation devices. You know, Captain Kirk wanted to be down on the surface of a planet, so he'd teleport himself down there. Theoretically, it works. Whether in practice it was actually created is a completely different story. I don't know. I haven't yet seen any evidence. I've seen all the stories. I've seen the Star Treks and the Star Wars. They're wonderful stories, and they may well be based on historical events. And when I say historical, I mean thousands of years old, not recent events.
Yeah, I've heard some crazy stories about that. They say, like, they take children when they're young, maybe like 10 to 12 years old, and then the children grow up and become these super soldiers fighting these aliens, and it's basically like they're on suicide missions to just kind of make damage, but somehow they regenerate their bodies, bring them back to life, the super soldiers, and then once they've done their 20-year tour on Mars, they're brought back in time to their age where they were, placed back in that point of time, and brains wiped and they don't remember anything. I mean, it sounds like a great, fantastic movie, but how people be coming up with all these details about it is just strange. And I just kind of said it in a nutshell, but you get the gist of how wild and crazy some of these stories are.
Oh, they are. But one point here, which I mean, this is a real fact. How many children go missing in America every year?
Yeah. That too. They say that a lot of them. Some people hypothesize that a lot of these missing people are being experimented on, or they're taken as like slave labor on other planets besides even Mars.
Yeah, the figure is 800,000. 800,000 children go missing in America every year. In Britain, it's 200,000.
There's a high number in people that go into national parks around here, like the national parks. Go missing in national parks without a trace too. Yeah.
There's a big mystery there, and if we have time, I could say that will feed into one of the more outrageous and disturbing events currently going on. And
oh yeah, we got time. If you got time, I got time. You let me know when you got to go. I got nothing but time.
Are you familiar with QAnon?
Yes, yes. Like recently just popped up that name. Haven't really heard about it at all besides like the past really like couple of months. It's been popped. Like if it was out there before, it was like so small, media coverage didn't really hear it. But the last couple of months, I've been hearing that name a lot, and I've been seeing what David, what's his name?
Wilcox.
Wilcock, yes, David Wilcock. He's been talking about them a lot, so I'm kind of
Okay.
That whole craziness is going on. Yeah.
It's a real. I'm not going to say it's a real person because I don't know the name. Nobody knows the name. Who Q is. Mm-hmm. Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. It's supposed to represent a high-level security clearance in the Department of Energy. That's where it derives from. Now, I don't know if that's correct or not, but Q, there is a team of people, probably relatively small team, probably less than 10, who work to create what's called the Q drops. Now, these appear on a website, which anybody can look at, qmap.pub. If you go onto that, you'll see all the Q drops. And if you're interested, you can see the president's tweet, which he does on a regular basis. You can see what he's saying as well. qmap.pub, and that will bring up the current Q drops. Now, Q has been operating since October 2017. So just short of 4,000 drops so far, and they are cryptic. They're not saying this is going to happen. They're saying this might happen. They're saying that there are certain individuals within the US government, specifically in the Democratic Party, who have done not very good things, who will pay for their crimes. And there have been certain predictions made which haven't come true. Certain people are going to be arrested, and that hasn't necessarily happened. So some people are a little dubious that Q is actually anything more than, I think the phrase is, a LARP, a live action role play. I think it's more than that. I think Q is a real intelligence operation, and it's operated. It's obviously in the with the agreement of the president, the executive office, because obviously it couldn't have. Some of the things which are said are very, very disturbing, and not least of the disturbing of that are the disappearance of children and the use of children as sex slaves. There's a huge trade in women and children. It's second only to the drugs trade in profitability. If you can trade women, especially young women, teenagers, or even less than teenagers, there are certain things which happen to these children from which they never recover. I don't think it's necessary to go into the detail of it currently, but I think if you are aware of a certain, I'm going to say a drug, it's, all right, let's call it a drug, Adrenochrome. Have you heard that name before?
Oh, yeah. I recently just heard that, and it's crazy what they're saying.
Yes,
exactly. Adrenochrome is like when someone is under a lot of stress and fear, it's produced in the blood, and they've been killing people and drinking this kind of, it's crazy.
Yes, it sounds absolutely ridiculous. It sounds something out of a Stephen King novel. It's
Right.
not. It's real. This is happening.
It's crazy. And they say they're gonna all get taken down. Apparently, that's what they're saying.
Well,
Like,
if people have committed crimes of that nature, they deserve to be taken down.
yeah, like I said, this crazy global cabal.
But one of the problems, which is a problem which has been identified quite firmly by Q, is that, or QAnon, basically the difference between Q and QAnon is Q is the person who makes the drops, or the group who make the drops. QAnon are the people who follow and try to interpret and determine what is happening. One of the problems is that if this information became widely known without serious preparation, there would be such a reaction to it and against the people who are perceived as being responsible that there would literally be rioting in the streets. So people have to be prepared for the information. They have to be prepared by being shown gradually what is going on. And that is part of what Q is doing, is preparing people for what is going on. Now, in America, there is something called a sealed indictment.
Yeah, I heard about it. They said it's something like, I think, 186,000, something like that.
That's the current figure. Up to a couple of years ago, the average annual number of sealed indictments was about 1,500. We're now at 180,000. These are sealed indictments. These are indictments which have been prepared, having had evidence presented in front of a grand jury. The evidence is there, and a decision is made to indict an individual or a group of individuals. But due to the court time, maybe, or due to the lack of people available to enforce the indictment, they are sealed. Nobody knows what's in them. That's why they're sealed. So nobody can be warned in advance that they are likely to be arrested. So you've got this overhanging situation where you've got a huge number of sealed indictments, which are known to exist. I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. These indictments exist. They are prepared by the Department of Justice, and they're mainly the work of a prosecutor, I forget his first name, Huber, who's working with William Barr, who's the Attorney General, to prepare these indictments. And at some point they will become unsealed, and we will find out what is going on. Until that happens, nobody can do anything more than speculate as to what's going on. But there is certainly something going on that is not being reported by what is euphemistically called the mainstream media. It's being reported on alternative channels, on YouTube channels. You mentioned David Wilcox. There are plenty of other people who are talking about this and have talked about it for a while. There's a guy called Austin Steinbart who's recently come out claiming to be Q. He's got some interesting things to say. Whether they're correct or not, time will tell. So there's a lot going on below the surface that we're not being informed about. And this is the problem that is being faced by, can we say, QAnon? Because if all this information, even a fraction of what we've talked about already, becomes public knowledge, it will cause a great deal of problem to the average American. And there are 300 million Americans. They all have to be educated. So to an extent, we're doing a little bit of that education right now, saying that there will be unsealing of indictments which will reveal crimes which are fairly horrific. We mentioned adrenochrome. It derives from the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland is it's the fight or flight gland. If you're terrified by something and you have to get away, your body will suddenly have an infusion of adrenaline, so you can run fast and you can run further than you thought you could do. If you're going to flee, if you're going to fight, it gives you the strength to do all manner of things you wouldn't normally consider yourself capable of doing. If a young person is traumatized so badly that their adrenal levels go through the roof, that, after they're killed and their blood is drained, is the drug of choice of many people in Hollywood, in high society, in politics, and in business. Because it has no after effects. It is addictive in that everybody wants to continue taking it, but it has no side effects, as the other major drugs do: heroin, cocaine, crack, all the rest of them. They all have terrible side effects. Adrenochrome doesn't. Sorry.
You think about like the Bible prophecies with things that's going on. It's crazy because like I've been on this planet for 46 years. I only know what I've absorbed and learned, read, and taught. But like, do you think this is getting us prepared, the stage for something that could be even far worse than what we're seeing today? We're talking about like the third Antichrist and this person showing up before. It's like with all this, like everything. I don't know if you're religious or what. I'm not trying to harp on anybody's type of religion, but just that whole Antichrist thing and the mark of the beast and all that. Is this getting us prepared for that?
That's a good summary, actually. That's a good way of putting it. Because there's always the polarity in the universe. There's always good. There's always evil. If we can confront evil with good, evil is basically not destroyed. It doesn't retain its power. The stories throughout the Bible. I was brought up an Anglican, a Christian. I was baptized. I went through school where religion was a major part of it. I attended chapel every day at school. So I'm very familiar with the Bible stories. They're great stories. They're wonderful archetypal stories of how we should live. And also what temptations we will be subjected to. And if we're aware of those temptations, we can confront them and deal with them. If we submit ourselves to them, we know what the result will be. So most religions, I'm not just saying it's Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, they all have the same lessons for us to learn. But basically, we have to do it ourselves. No superhero is going to come down and say, right, okay, let's sort this mess out. You go over there, you sort yourself out over there. You're a bad load of idiots. Stop fighting wars. No, that's not going to happen. We have to do it ourselves. Any more than E.T. is not going to come down and say, okay, guys, stop all this ridiculous nonsense. Get your act together. Then you can join the Galactic Federation and you can get a great deal of pleasure out of it. But until you can get your act together and behave like decent people, stop fighting each other, because if E.T. arrives on Earth today, what's he going to see as our major preoccupation? It's killing each other. That's the only thing we seem to have done with any great deal of success over the last several thousand years. We've got to stop doing it. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. We've got to get our act together, but we have got to do it.
Right.
And maybe Q is just there to help guide us a little bit in the right direction.
Yeah, seems like, I don't know, some things must take place. Some things is, it's going to happen no matter what, seems like. But and fast forward to the end, the good guys win, and then who's to say what's going to be after that? That's a whole, we could go off a whole nother place with that,
What's going to happen after that is a reversion to what happened before it all went wrong. There are all these wonderful stories throughout history of the Golden Age, which, it's referred to in most civilizations. There was a Golden Age, and then basically Lucifer came along, or whatever you want to call it, Baphomet came along, and we all went a bit apeshit and got it all wrong. Right. But there was a golden age where we lived in peace and prosperity and harmony with each other, and we're trying to return to it. And maybe that's true. Maybe there was a golden age. Maybe now. There are people who will say that the emotion of fear is what certain extraterrestrial races live on, the fear generated in humans.
Oh my gosh, that's what I've said this so many times, that I truly believe there are entities that their life force is our fear. Like us being scared, or even people bug out and act crazy, and they have violence and fear, they thrive off of that.
Yeah, they do.
That's
now,
what I believe.
If that is the case, that implies that there are good forces and there are bad forces off our planet. The idea that we're alone in the universe is such a 20th century idea. It's the famous question, isn't it? Are we alone in the universe or not?
Do you think? Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna ask, do you think, like, people, if our technology with like health stuff, do you think we could live to be like 700 or 900 years old, the way they say some people used to live that long in the Bibles a long time ago?
Oh yeah. I see no reason why not.
That's interesting.
You know,
And then our average lifespan now is like 65, or you'd be lucky if you get to 100. You know.
sure, yeah. You know, if oh, there's somebody trying to get in.
No, it's one of my little GoPro cameras. Oh,
All right, okay. No, yes, there are stories in the Bible of people who lived sort of 700, 800, 900 years. They came fairly soon after the creation, implying that the original humans had the ability to live and develop over a very, very long period of time. We seem to have lost that. We seem to have regressed. You know, all right, there's the phrase in the Bible, you know, 70 years and 10, which is 70 years, is the average human lifespan. Maybe that is the case. Maybe that is what we were told we had to have. But there are now, you know, the research into the DNA, which is basically our makeup, you know, what we're made of, DNA. Most of the research seems to have identified some of that DNA, and a lot of it is now referred to as junk DNA. Well,
it's so funny that they call it that.
they call it junk DNA because they don't know what the hell it is or what it means. But supposing that DNA is DNA, which if we can understand it and maybe activate it, we would regain some of the abilities that we know that we could have. Psychokinesis, for instance.
Right.
Psychic abilities, clairaudience, clairvoyance. All these abilities, we're aware of them.
It's like that krill society. The krill, those ladies that used to grow their hair down to the floor. They had like crazy stuff.
Yeah. But are you familiar with the work of Zecharia Sitchin?
Oh yeah, and Anunnaki and ancient Anunnaki.
Yeah.
Planet X, Nibiru.
That's the one. Yeah. It's supposed to be coming back in about, I don't know, was it 1,200 years time or something? So, you know, keep an eye out.
Right.
Up when it goes by. But his idea was that the human race was created using the DNA of extraterrestrials. Enlil, Enki were the leaders at the time who had come to Earth to try to find gold, because they needed gold to protect their own planet, which was deteriorating. Global warming again, you see, that's what the problem was. And they decided they didn't like digging for it themselves, so they're going to take these apes that they found in Africa, and they're going to give them a little bit of their DNA, which would make them into intelligent creatures who could be ordered around and told to do things. But in order to ensure that they didn't then take over, they switched off some of the DNA that the extraterrestrials had, that they had transferred into the apes, which became humans. Because it's interesting that we can't trace human ancestry back much beyond about 2 million years.
Yeah.
And we're away, and this Earth has been here for billions of years, so we're told. Or maybe it has, I don't know. But that sort of story, all these stories, whether they're true or not, they all add up to one thing. A, that there was a period of time before our known history where great things happened, like pyramids got built and all around the world. There was a great deal of knowledge that we are only just beginning to scratch the surface of. We can't build the Great Pyramid today. We don't have the technology to do it. Yep. Certainly don't have the money to do it, let alone 3 of the damn things. Or the Serapeum, which is 20 miles south of Giza, where they have these granite boxes, which nobody knows how they got them in there because they're underground, made out of solid piece of granite, weighing 100 tons. How do they move them? You know, these are unanswered questions.
Yeah. You know, I used to always wonder when I used to read in the Bible in Genesis, the way things were worded, it was like plural, where it would say, let's create man in our image. Like it was more than one person doing that, like a group of people. But then some people say, oh, that's the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But I don't think that that's really what it's kind of what was translated. You know, when you talk about Icke, and changing the DNA and things like that. And then over time, everything's just kind of evolved into different stories. Then, of course, people know that some books of the Bible were left out. You know, the Book of Enoch, for example.
Yeah, yeah. Book of Thomas.
There you go.
Yeah, you know, and then you get the other stories of the Bible that Christ was married to Mary Magdalene.
Right, and yeah, I've heard that theory too. And then his blood, and had some children, and his bloodline has gone all the way up to today. Some people
had 3 children. He had 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter was called Tamsin. The eldest son was called Joseph, and the second son was called Jesus. And he came to Britain with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea, and that was the founding of the quite a lot of the religion in Britain. But yeah, there are so many stories. I've actually seen the alleged grave of Christ in Kashmir. I spent time in Kashmir many years ago, and in Srinagar in Kashmir there is what is known and promoted as the grave of Christ. Well, what's he doing buried in Kashmir? Nobody told us that he went to Kashmir, which is a long way from Jerusalem, where he was allegedly buried. But there's an interesting passage in the Bible. At the time of the resurrection, which is Easter Sunday, or the Easter Sunday that we recognize the resurrection, it was a different time then, that he was approached by the heavenly host. Now that is a very strange phrase, heavenly host. Who are the heavenly host? What is the heavenly host? Right. And he accompanied them to heaven. What is heaven? Right. It depends on how the original Aramaic texts are translated. But the heavenly host refers to the Essene community, which is known to exist, the Essene community. They dressed in white robes, white clothing. And the story is that they took Christ from the cross. He was nearly dead. He wasn't actually dead, because crucifixion is a very slow death. Basically, you suffocate because your body is falling forward onto your chest, and the muscles from the arm are constricting the chest. You can't breathe, and therefore you die because you can't breathe. They took him off the cross after sundown and took him up to their community, which was known as heaven. The Essene community were doctors, or what we would refer to as doctors. They were people able to treat conditions such as the result of crucifixion. And they revived Christ. So he resurrected. So the stories have some element of truth about them. It's a matter of how they're interpreted. Because the Bible, as we know it today in English, was only translated into English in 1611 by order of King James. That's why it's the King James version of the Bible. King James of Britain, King James VI, I think he was. He ordered that the Bible should be written into English. It was translated from Latin, Greek, and Aramaic, which was the local language of Israel at the time. But were the translations accurate? Now, they put many of the best scholars available to do it, and the Bible was an incredible work of prose. It's quite extraordinary, the ability to translate into such wonderful language as the Bible we know today is. And I find I only read the King James Bible. My family Bible was published in 1851, so it's about 170 years old. And the language in that is the original language of translation of the Bible. Now, do you know the date of the day of creation?
No.
Okay, the date of the day of creation is the 22nd of October, 4004 BC. So how do we know that?
I was going to ask, how do we come to...
It's very simple. There's you had mentioned earlier that there are people in the Bible who are shown to be many hundreds of years old in some cases.
Right.
Their ages are recounted. There was a bishop, an Anglican bishop in Britain called Bishop Usher of Armagh, which Armagh is in now is in Northern Ireland. It was that at that time part of Ireland. And he took it upon himself, now the Bible was in English, to go through the Bible and calculate the date of the day of creation by taking the ages of some of the older people known to exist, such as Noah and Solomon and David, and calculating it back, given the number of generations that were shown to exist. He begat that, and they begat that, and so on, right through the Bible. All this is in the Bible. It's now in English. And in 1623, he made the announcement that the date of day of creation was October the 22nd, 4004 BC, which was then accepted as being a reality. What followed from that is particularly important. If the church, and the church was the major power and influence at the time, and it was that up to 1859, and there's a very specific reason for that date, 1859. From 1623, for the next 150 odd years, the church was the arbiter of life. What the church said was what people believed. So if the church said, the date of the day of creation is 4004 BC, any historical evidence, any historical research could not possibly have occurred before the date of day of creation, which is why all the dating of Egyptian artifacts and all the dating of Sumerian and Babylonian artifacts and Chinese, Indian artifacts, you see very, very few dates before 4000 BC. For that reason, the church being the all-powerful arbiter of what is correct. Right. Because most people couldn't read. They would go to church and they would listen to their priest, and the priest would read from the Bible, and he'd say things like, "This is the word of God. It is true."
Yeah. Back then, people thought the earth was flat.
Oh, don't go there. Don't. The earth is not flat. The earth is a globe.
Yeah, some of the whole flat earth movement, you know how they are.
In fact, there is a reason for that now, why people suddenly are aware, there's a lot of discussion about the flat earth. And this comes back to Apollo, actually. Interesting segue here. If you can associate people who believe in the flat earth, and I do not, I make that very clear, with people who claim that Apollo didn't happen, you can discredit them. And that's why it came about 5 years ago. It started coming. I became aware of this strange group of people who were saying, "Well, look, the horizon is flat. You can see it, and you can take a laser, and look, water is flat for miles and miles, and you've got a big wall of ice around Antarctica. Well, that's as far as you can get." There's a very easy way to actually prove that the flat Earth couldn't possibly exist, because if it was flat, how come everybody living on the Earth today does not see the same pattern of stars in the sky? Up in the northern hemisphere, above in America, in Britain, where I am, America, where you are, we look up in the sky and we can see the same stars, slightly different positions, but we can recognize Orion's belt, and we can see the plough, and our North Star is Polaris, which is where compasses point. Though they point there not because of Polaris, but because of the Earth's magnetic field. If you go to Australia, you can't see Orion's belt. You can't see the plough. They have the Southern Cross. Right. They don't have a South Star.
Yeah. They say that the United Nations map, that's how it really looks from high up. They say that the way the United Nations map is, with everything flat like that, they say that's what we're living on, kind of this thing.
yeah, they say that because that is that United Nations map is a very good way of portraying all the countries, all the parts of the world on one map. It's got North America, it's got Europe, it's got Asia, and you can see it all on one map. You can't see Antarctica there because that's sort of down the bottom.
Yeah, it's crazy. The flat earthers. You know what I want to ask you? This I just thought of this. You know how over here in the United States we have Area 51, a lot of these top secret bases. I just heard last night for the first time that there's possibly an Area 52. and also in Area 29, I think they said. I found out something last night. But is there anything like that over in Britain? Do you guys have like a spot like that with like a name where you guys think there's stuff going on?
Oh yeah, we got but much smaller. America, don't forget, is a very, very big country compared to Britain. I mean, the whole of Britain would fit into Oregon, for instance.
Okay, right.
And
as a small but powerful country.
Yeah, I mean, it's Britain is is about the same size as Florida. It's a very, I mean, we say we're going to drive across country. Well, that's 200 miles. It's not very far. If you're going to drive across country in America, it's nearly 3,000 miles.
You guys got the RAF Air Force, British Air Force, RAF, right?
Yeah.
Respect to those guys flying around those jets.
Yes. RAF stands for Royal Air Force.
Royal Air Force, that's right.
Which is one of the reasons, and I don't know if it's a reason that your Constitution was written the way it is, because in Britain we have a head of state, that's the Queen,
right,
and we have a Prime Minister. Currently it's Boris Johnson. The Queen is a hereditary head of state. Mm-hmm. She became head of state when her father, George VI, died. We've had a monarchy in this country for over 1,000 years. And all sections of the military, which is why I say the RAF, the Royal Air Force, they owe their allegiance to the head of state, not the head of government. The Royal Navy owes their allegiance to the head of state. The Army, similarly. All sections of Britain, such as the law courts, they're called the Royal Courts of Justice. They owe their allegiance to the head of state. Now, the head of state has no political power. The head of state cannot do anything other than be the head of state, which is what the Queen said when she became the Queen in 1952. She's been there a long time. She's met, what's the figure? 14 American presidents, 6 popes. She's been around the block a few times. She knows what to do. But she has no political power. She is a figurehead.
Right.
And because all the sections of the army and the judiciary and the legal they owe their allegiance to the Queen, not to the government. And that is a key point. That's why there's been no revolution in this country. Because if the army said, no, we don't like what's going on, we're going to overthrow the government, the Navy would say, well, we're not going to join you because we don't agree with you. Or the RAF might say, no, we're not going to join you. And the legal system might say, well, if you do, you're going to get prosecuted. So it's nothing to do with the government. And that is the key point about a constitutional monarchy is different from a republic. And the United States is a republic. And you chucked the British out in 1776 and said, get lost. We're not interested. Because Britain did one of the most stupid things they could possibly do. They said, we're going to tax you on whatever it was they were taxing, but you've got no representation and you cannot make any representations to us about it. We're just going to tax you. And they said, no, you're not. Go away.
The Boston Tea Party.
Boston Tea Party, that's right. I'm chucking it all in the tea. And now
redcoats are coming. The redcoats are. I learned all that stuff in school as well.
Yeah, no, look, a lot of skirmishes went on. Britain wasn't very pleased about it, so they sent a few ships over to try to get the country back, which is why Canada still has the Queen as head of state, because Canada agreed to remain part of, at that time, the British Empire, now the British Commonwealth. A lot of countries want to join the British Commonwealth. It's got 53 countries represented in the British Commonwealth, of which the Queen is head of state. It's an incredible achievement.
Going back to the moon landings thing, I did have this one thing I wanted to bring up about Stanley Kubrick. I was watching something, it was on TV, and they were saying that apparently there's some footage that he has that's been locked away in a safe, They said they can't open up until like 75 or 80 years, which I think is going to be around here 2028 or 2030, if I'm not mistaken. Have you heard something about that? About some locked away hidden footage that had something to do with the moon landing?
I've heard so many stories about Stanley Kubrick being responsible for it. A lot of it derives from, shall we say, a spoof documentary made by a French filmmaker, where he took footage of well-known people, Henry Kissinger, Gerald Ford, all the people around at the time, and basically they were talking on camera about something completely different, but he dubbed them saying, got to fake the moon landings. Now, interesting you mentioned Stanley Kubrick, because I think the best story I've heard about is if Stanley Kubrick had anything to do with filming the moon landings, he would have, because he was such a perfectionist, he would have wanted to do it on location.
Yeah, he likes to like take something out of the shot and then a different angle he'll put something there or move something slightly. I was checking his little style of filming out. It's kind of genius. It's kind of genius and artsy when you look at some of the stuff, you know.
He's extraordinary. He was an incredible filmmaker. And 2001: A Space Odyssey, which premiered 1968, is
awesome.
It's one of the great films of the 20th century. An incredible film.
Incredible detail.
Yeah, incredible detail. But now here's the point. A lot of people mention Stanley Kubrick. The time Apollo was being, shall we say, created, which would have been the mid to late 1960s, Stanley Kubrick was working on the final edit and composition and promotion of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't think he would have had the time or even the inclination, because Stanley Kubrick never actually worked on location. Maybe Full Metal Jacket, he did a little bit, but most of the time he shot at a film studio in North London called Boreham Wood Studios, which was near where he lived, because he was so terrified of flying that he remained in Britain all his life after he'd arrived here. Now, one of the things about 2001: A Space Odyssey and many other very important films of that time and later, here we say Blade Runner is another one, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is another one, Back to the Future. Who was the special effects director on all those films?
It was Stanley Kubrick?
No, he was a film director.
On Back to the Future? I didn't know that on Back to the Future. I know Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg. I didn't realize that, because I love the Back to the Future movies.
No, okay. I said the special effects director.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, the special effects director. I didn't know that.
Okay. Check out Douglas Trumbull.
Okay. I've heard that name. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, Douglas Trumbull was the special effects director on 2001, on Blade Runner.
I just hearing him on the little thing I was watching. Yep,
Okay,
that
now,
sounds familiar.
He was as good a special effects director as Stanley Kubrick was a film director. Stanley Kubrick directed actors and created scenes. Douglas Trumbull created there weren't such things as CGI at the time. They were all done with models, real life models, miniature cameras, periscope cameras. He was brilliant at it, absolutely brilliant. Now that's the effect that would have been required, or that's the requirement at the time. Now, there is, I don't know if it's still online now, but there are places you can see it. There was a film produced about 3 or 4 years ago called Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors. Make Believe, Smoke and Mirrors, that is a reference to what filmmakers do. They use smoke and mirrors.
Right.
It's make believe. Film is all make believe.
Yeah.
You're seeing it, and because you want to believe it, you'll go along with it. You know, I've seen an 80-foot gorilla climb the Empire State Building. I've seen dinosaurs chase kids around kitchens in Jurassic Park. Is that real? No, of course it's not. It's Hollywood at its finest.
Right.
It's special effects. But back in the 60s, this is the time we're talking about with Apollo, there weren't such thing as CGI or blue screen or any of what we now take for granted as creating special effects. Now, if you look at the special effects in 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick was using, for the first time in a major film, a special effects technique called front-screen projection.
Right.
Which was, that's as opposed to back-screen projection.
I was looking at that setup last night where it's like the camera and it's like this thing here. It's like a big rig. I was checking that out. I seen screenshots of the way that system is.
Yeah. It's basically projecting through a half-silvered mirror the scene you want on the camera, which is projected onto a screen behind the action, and the camera is filming that scene through the same mirror.
Yeah.
So what you've got,
that.
and you can always tell if that's being used because there's an artifact where the screen meets the real life action, and you can see it. There are various websites which have looked at 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is used on that, and various other films where the same technique is used, and there is a dividing line. The detail in the background is a bit washed out because basically it's being projected onto a screen. The film is also filming real actors in live action. Well, in 2001 they were actors in monkey suits and they were jumping around. It was very effective. That was the Dawn of Man sequence at the beginning of the film. Mm-hmm. The background were scenes from the African plains projected onto a screen. A big screen, 30 foot high, maybe 50 foot across, huge screen from a big projector. And it was effective because we wanted to believe it. Right. But looking at it now, if you look at some of the pictures of Apollo, especially the later missions where they had mountains in the background, which they didn't have on Apollo 11, there was a very plain background. If you look at the background, they're all washed out. You don't see any detail in these mountains. Maybe there aren't any detail, but there's a lot of detail in the foreground. There are rocks in the foreground. There are
looking at some pictures like that. Some of those pictures you sent me in my email, the link, I was looking at some pictures like that.
Yeah, exactly. So could it have been that the Apollo missions were all recreated using miniatures, mannequins, special effects, high technology? All right, if that did happen, where did it happen? Who was responsible? Okay.
Sounds to me somewhere.
Have you heard of a place called Laurel Canyon, north of Los Angeles?
Yes.
Laurel Canyon, it's got a strange story. Some strange stories behind Laurel Canyon. A lot of people lived in Laurel Canyon.
Looks like Tatooine from Star Wars, kind of.
Yeah, but going further back than that, Frank Zappa lived there. What's his name? Jim Morrison. Oh, I'll tell you a story about Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison of The Doors?
Yeah, oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. His father, Jim Morrison's father, was Admiral George Morrison, who was commander of the American naval fleet at the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which started the Vietnam War.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
I'm not saying that Jim Morrison had anything to do with it. No, he didn't. He was just the son of the commander of that particular fleet. But
interesting fact.
Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a false flag event. There were no torpedo boat attacking the American fleet, but it was the excuse to start the Vietnam War.
I just found out recently, and I didn't know this for a while. Like I just found this out a few months ago. I seen something where they were saying there was some UFO incidents in Vietnam.
Oh yeah,
UFOs were shooting at the boats.
Yeah, if you read Linda Moulton Howe's book, High Strangeness.
I've been trying to get in contact with her. I want to try to get her on the show. Linda, I listened to her on Coast to Coast.
Yeah, she is a very, very lovely lady. Is Linda? I met her a few years ago.
Nice.
Very, very nice lady. She probably won't remember me. It doesn't really matter. I remember her. I'll tell you somebody else who'd worth getting on the show if you could is Shirley Maclaine.
Shirley Maclaine, yes, I would love to get her on too. Yeah, I'm trying little by little. I do all this myself, but I'm going to keep, as long as I can keep going, I'm going to keep it going.
Just say that every time somebody says, not this time, that's a step forward to the time they will say yes.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. And I'm going to put all his links, his contact information to the website with the magazine and for everything in the description of this video. There's books, all kinds of stuff, videos, all kind of stuff you guys can check out.
Yeah.
I see you've been on the Discovery Channel, Sci-Fi, all different news channels, BBC, been all around the world.
Oh, yeah. Russian television.
Britain, Europe, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Yeah.
Nepal, wow. Well, you're in Nepal. That's kind of, no, I'm maybe getting confused. No, never mind. I'm thinking the Nazca lines.
Nazca line, no, that's Peru.
Peru.
Kathmandu is the capital of Nepal, which is north of India, south of China.
That's where Indiana Jones was in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Somebody you could definitely approach is David Childress.
I sent them an email, and you know what? Actually, I'm trying to. I sent them an email back, and they sent me a copy of one of his magazines.
Oh, that's right, World Explorer.
Adventures Unlimited.
Adventures Unlimited. Yeah, that's great.
I just got this in the mail last week, and I'm hoping I can get him on.
Well, you should be able to. You could do an interview like this. I mean,
I sent them an email. They responded back. Apparently, I'm at this point where I think they're trying to see if he wants to do it, but then they sent me that magazine.
Well, he's got some.
And my kids love reading this kind of stuff too. I'm gonna let them check out your website.
Well, that's good. If you send me your postal address on email, I'll send you a copy of Nexus.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna definitely send some dollars your way and hopefully some business too. And even for this episode, I have I was just looking at that with the grenade with the virus on there, COVID-19.
Yeah, there's an interesting article in there about QAnon, by the way.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just looking at that on your website. What do you think about the virus? Everybody's quarantined now, everybody's locked out. Like, do you think, because the big thing now, everybody's conspiracying this 5G. They're thinking 5G technology. I even seen they got some 6G. They're saying that it's really these 5G waves and not really the COVID virus as much. Who knows? I don't know.
There's obviously you've heard of David Icke.
David Icke. I'm sure I have. That name sounds familiar.
Well, just check him out if you have davidicke.com. Anyway,
Icke.
Icke. David Icke.
Yeah. Oh, I always pronounce it Icke. I thought it was Icke. David Icke. David Icke. But a silver-haired gentleman. Yes, I was just watching him talk about some stuff. Yeah. He
was interviewed about 10 days ago on a YouTube channel in the UK called London Real. .tv.
London Real.
And he was talking about exactly what you just asked there, about the COVID-19 virus and what was going on. And London Real YouTube channel with millions of hits on it got taken down.
Wow.
Now, whether it was what David Icke was saying, that's what it appears to be.
Yeah, you know what? That's exactly right. Because I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, on my Instagram, somebody sent me a clip of that, and they said keep sharing because it keeps ticking down. Somebody, sent me like maybe a 5 or 6 minute long clip of that.
Yeah. It was done with the host of London Real is a guy called Brian Rose, R-O-S-E, Brian Rose, who set the thing up about 9 years ago. He used to work in finance in London, and he decided he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to do something that helped people. And he set up this channel. He's interviewed hundreds of people. Same sort of way in which Joe Rogan interviews people.
Mm-hmm. Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan he's got one of the top podcasts in the world, is Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Very good. People like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, who's talking about the old, what happened in the past when the Laurentine ice sheet, which has covered North America, why did that melt? Got hit by a bloody comet. The whole thing melted.
Wow.
And the evidence is still around if you know where to look and you know how to interpret the landscape. You can see these huge sheets of water coming off the North American ice sheet. That's why the sea levels rose about 100 feet quite rapidly. And this was about just by the end of the last ice age. Interesting. So Joe Rogan does these long style interviews, 2-3 hour interviews, which are very good because if the subject is interesting to people, they will listen to it, and that's the key. Not these very short, sharp, chopped interviews that go on.
Yeah.
Which the Clinton News Network puts out regularly.
You're talking about the ice sheets and melting. What do you think about? I just heard this recently from David Wilcock. They're talking about Atlantis has been discovered up under Antarctica, and they've known this for a long time. But recently, they're saying possibly this year it may be revealed that they discovered some technology there that still works. And
yes, something was identified at the time of the 2016 election in America. The Secretary of State in the Obama administration,
Clinton.
John Kelly. No, Kelly? Was it Kelly?
Oh, yeah, Kerry. Okay.
Kerry, that's the one, yeah. He was actually in Antarctica on the day of the election, which seems a very strange thing that something more important than the presidential election would require his presence in Antarctica.
Yeah.
Also, Buzz Aldrin was there, a representative of the Russian president was there. The Russian Orthodox Church was there. Yeah. High-level people. Why did they suddenly all go to Antarctica? What was going on? So it's possible, yes, that something has been identified. I don't know what it is. I don't have information, but there are so many stories around. There's a story of the U.S. Air Force planes who service the South Pole community, and there are various outlying research stations around Antarctica. And on one of these, which was, I think, near the Ross Ice Sheet, one of the personnel at this station had an accident, which required an immediate evacuation. In order to go from the South Pole, where the plane started, to, let's say, the Ross Ice Sheet, they had to go, obviously, on a certain compass bearing, a certain direction. I mean, in Antarctica, you go high enough, you don't hit anything. You just fly straight. They were told that they were not allowed to overfly a certain physical location in Antarctica. They had to go around it. So they did on the way out there, and on the way back, the injured officer was quite bad. They said, well, we've got to get back as fast as we can. So they flew straight over this forbidden location. And they said it was a huge cavern in the ice. They couldn't actually see what was in it, but they said there was certainly something there, and they could see why they were told not to fly over it. Wow. But having done so, when they got back, it was obviously their flight had been tracked on radar, and it was known what happened. They were immediately taken out and returned to America, basically for disobeying orders. I don't know what's happened to them since. There was an article about it in Nexus, and it was from an interview that had been conducted by Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah, people talk about maybe it's go to the Hollow Earth, entrance to the Hollow Earth, or civilization, or base, or something down there.
Well, yes, I mean, these stories crop up every now and then. So, I mean, there are certainly caverns, huge caverns underground. I don't know if that makes it a hollow Earth. But what's more interesting is a hollow moon.
Oh yeah. Some people say the moon is artificial. It's been brought here. It's hollow. They say it rang when NASA had landed on the moon. They say it rang for hours because it was hollow, and people think little gray aliens under there with the big black eyes.
Well, let's just take this one a little bit further. Let's say, suppose the moon is artificial. Supposing it was created, let's say it's a spaceship,
Right.
disguised to look like a planet. It'd be quite easy to do that. If you could build something 2,160 miles in diameter, which is what the moon is, if you could build something that big, you could disguise it to look like a planet, like a rocky surface. Supposing you did that, and you made it hollow, because obviously there's no point in having it solid. Yes, it would ring like a bell if it was hit with sufficient recording instruments to find and to record the vibrations. Mm. Now, if that happened, let's say that it was created artificially, and it's now where ET lives. The moon has one face towards Earth at all times. We never see the far side of the moon. It's not the dark side, it's the far side. The dark side is the record by Pink Floyd. The far side is the part of the moon we don't see. It gets as much sunlight as the front does. That's why it's not the dark side. So if 41% of the lunar surface is invisible to us from Earth, this would be a wonderful location for ET to come and go at his pleasure. If he wanted to inspect what was going on Earth, he could just fly around and appear on Earth with his magnificent flying machines, which can be visible or not visible, depending on how they want to be seen. There are so many sightings of unidentified objects.
Did you see the recent one? A few days, like maybe last week, of the 3 objects flying. Somebody had one of those cameras with the telescope real close to the moon, and you see the 3 objects flying, and they're casting the long shadows over. Have you seen that footage?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Just recently.
There are several films. There are several short films showing something moving across the lunar surface because they cast a shadow on the moon. Mm-hmm. You could see them. You could see the object, and you could see its shadow below it.
These things got to be really big too. They got to be huge
things. Well, obviously, if you live on the moon, you've only got 1/6 gravity. You could easily build something much bigger than you could here on Earth, because gravity is such a constraint.
Oh, that reminds me. Have you seen I'm sure you've heard of this. Have you seen the image of the thing? This gigantic thing looks like a submarine.
Yeah.
They're kind of stuck in a moon crater. And they said that they went there and they brought this, looked like a lady out, and her hair was there. Have you seen that? Is she like a little Chinese, Asian-looking lady with like dreadlocks? Have you seen that footage?
Yeah. It's supposed to be Apollo 20.
Yeah. It's like something like some secret mission with this gigantic thing that's like as big as the Empire State Building, this big ship.
Yeah. Well, size takes on a completely different meaning on the moon because there's so much less gravity. But one other interesting thing, which is first identified about over 50 odd years ago, before Apollo happened, if you just Google rolling rocks on the moon, you can find it. Rolling rocks on the moon. It was a photograph taken by the Lunar Orbiter mission. That's not to be confused with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is 2009. The Lunar Orbiter mission was one of 3 unmanned craft sent to the moon. The first was Ranger, then was Surveyor. The final one was Orbiter. There were 5 missions in Orbiter, I think 5 in Surveyor. Their basic purpose, this was mid-1960s, their basic purpose was to locate suitable landing sites for Apollo. A logical thing to do. Mm-hmm. And they had film cameras on them, on Lunar Orbiter, and they were taking photographs. And these are still available to see, or most of them are, but the one particular one, which somebody had identified, is from a crater on the bottom left-hand corner of the moon as we look at it, called Vitello Crater. And in this film is a very, very high-resolution film. I'll mention something else about film in a minute. This high-resolution film, they could identify the track of something on the lunar surface. And when NASA were asked what it was, they said, it's a rock dislodged by moonquake. Well, it's a logical answer. There's one problem. The rock's rolled uphill. What the hell is going on?
I have seen something about that.
it's a very distinct track, and my estimation is that the track, the object is about 40 foot across, about the size of a truck's container, 40 foot long, 40 foot across. There are several other tracks in the same photograph if you look above it, but this particular one, now I knew it existed, and after the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter had photographed the whole lunar surface, and the Lunar and Planetary Institute website put up the full map of the moon, which you could examine, I decided to see if I could find it again, because I knew exactly where it was, because the location had been given, and I did. It's still there.
Wow.
This is not a mistake. It's a completely different angle. The sun angle is different, so the shadows are different, but it's recognizably the same track. It's about 800 foot long, that's the estimate. And I first was aware of it in a book published by David Childress about 30, 40 years ago, called Antigravity and the World Grid. It's one of the books in that magazine you've got there.
Yeah. I was just thinking about these things they say we're mining the moon, and even some parts of the Earth where all these little, they say it looks like some type of ship came above the ground and dug all these little holes in the ground for miles and miles, just maybe grabbing minerals or whatever out of the dirt.
Well, there's an announcement by President Trump who's saying we should go back to the moon and mine minerals.
In 4 years, I don't see how they're going to pull that. I don't see how that's going to happen, really. I don't hear anything about them really ramping up trying to do that. Now they got the Space Force. They say we got the Space Force now, a new branch of the military, which has probably been there for years.
It could well have been. But I think Trump is playing a very, very clever game here. I think Trump is well informed. Whether you like him or not, that doesn't matter. Trump is very well informed. He has a lot of people around him who inform him of all sorts of things going on. He doesn't always do anything about them. He doesn't need to. Don't forget that he worked in the most competitive and most brutal business on the planet, the New York real estate market. He spent 30 years working in that. He came across some pretty shady characters. Anyway, aside from that, let's say that Trump is well informed. Let's say that he has been informed that there are question marks over the success of the Apollo missions. Let's just take this a little next step further. He made the announcement, or his vice president did last year, that we're going to return to the moon, not just wave a flag. We're going to stay there, and we're going to return with scientific exploration. Fine? No problem with that. And NASA are the designated agency to do it. Okay, that's fine. If NASA come back and say, we can't return to the moon, we need more money, and we haven't got a rocket that can do it yet, and there's a lot of danger with this radiation, Mr. President, I think we need a bit more time here. I think President Trump, who does not suffer fools gladly, is going to say, well, look, 50 years ago, you did it 9 times with 24 astronauts. What's the problem today? We've got all this new technology. Just do it, guys. If they then come back and say, we can't do it because we don't know how to protect our astronauts from the radiation, not just in the Van Allen belts, but way beyond them, because there's radiation in space way beyond the Van Allen belts. And there's one other thing in space, which is never discussed. It's the vacuum of space.
All the debris up there, too, flying around nowadays.
Oh, there's loads of stuff flying around. But the vacuum of space plays a very key part here. Now, we don't really understand vacuum. If you put your mouth on your arm and suck, that'll be a very, very small vacuum. And if you suck long enough, you get a red mark on your skin. True vacuum is, in effect, the presence of no atmosphere at all. Now, on the moon, there is no atmosphere. There is a full, hard vacuum, much harder than where the International Space Station is. There is a vacuum at the International Space Station, certainly. But the further away from Earth you get, the harder the vacuum becomes. It's measured in a unit called torr, T-O-R-R. named after Evangelista Torricelli, who was an Italian scientist of the 17th century, who invented the barometer, which used pressure. So the unit is known as a torr, T-O-R-R. On Earth, we have, at sea level, the pressure on Earth is 14.7 pounds per square inch. That is the weight of atmosphere pressing down on us, every square inch. If you take that up to a square foot, it's 144 times 14, which is about a ton per square foot. So it's quite a lot. If you go into the sea, you get even higher pressures. If you go into space, you get no pressure. You get no pressure at all because there's nothing to press down. There's no atmosphere. There's nothing that creates any pressure. It's called a vacuum. Now, most people will be familiar with the famous experiment you can do at school where you get a bell jar, which you can evacuate the air from it, and you put in this bell jar, you put a bell, so, and you can hear it ringing, like a telephone bell, hear it ringing, and as you pull the air out, the sound just goes away because there's nothing for the sound to travel through. There's no air. Right. So that's a vacuum. That's what happens in a vacuum. You get no sound traveling. Hence the famous phrase from Alien, in space, no one can hear you scream. But you can't. Now, if you take photographic film into a vacuum, are you familiar with photographic film?
Oh, yeah.
All right, that's photographic film. Most people are familiar with digital. Most cameras use digital recording.
The old school, 80s, the 80s.
Yeah. Old school. Old school. A digital film. Digital film is modern. Film is old. But film can record incredible detail. But film has a problem. If you take film into a vacuum, you get one of two things happen. The film will what's called outgas. That is a phenomena common to all vacuums. Any material held in a vacuum that contains any form of water, any form of moisture, the moisture will basically be sucked away from it, outgassed. That's why if you put water into a vacuum, it'll appear to boil. That's called outgassing.
So it's just on the film.
Yeah. So in a vacuum, the vacuum you get on the moon, this film would not be able to record anything.
And you said there's no way they could make some kind of container to.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yeah. That's their take on it. They created some type of special device that could withstand it.
Yeah, because on the lunar orbiter, they used photographic film. You can see all the specification on NASA website. But also the film and the camera was contained within a pressurized compartment within the spacecraft. And they show you where the nitrogen gas bottle, which provides the pressure, 1 pound per square inch, it's not very much, but it's enough. They show you the nitrogen gas container. And they can show you, so the film was pressurized. The other spacecraft which used photographic film around this time was the Hexagon Spy Satellite. Now, the Hexagon Spy Satellite was what was required after Gary Powers was shot down in his U-2 spy plane in 1960. Very embarrassing it was all round. So in order to avoid a plane getting shot down, but America still wanted to find out what Russia were doing, they had to have surveillance over Russia. They used a satellite, which would fly about 100 miles up, and it was totally impervious to any form of anti-aircraft gun or rockets. But it's in space, and it's in a vacuum. And they was using photographic film. And the photographic film had to be kept pressurized. How do I know this? Because I attended a presentation given by the man who had designed the cameras for the Hexagon Spy Satellite. And he said it had to be kept pressurized. It's the first time I'd ever heard that there was a problem in space with photographic film. That is why I claim that not only did humans not get to the moon, but they couldn't have taken the photographs we've been shown as being taken on the moon because the film cameras used the Hasselblad still camera and the Maurer data acquisition camera, the cine cameras mounted in the lunar landers, were not pressurized.
Wow.
They had no pressurization at all.
And what year did his camera come out? Well, his system, the pressurized system. What year did he do that?
It was first used on the lunar orbiter, and that was 1966, 67. And on Hexagon Spy Satellite, that was 1971. That was when it was first launched. There were 19 successful launches of the Hexagon Spy Satellite up to 1983, when it was replaced by I forget what it was called. It was replaced by a digital camera, basically, which doesn't need pressurization.
Have you heard a story about the Russians losing an astronaut in space by accident? Have you heard that story?
Oh, yeah. Lost more than one, actually.
Do you think that really happened?
Well, the recordings appear to indicate it was actually a woman that they recorded. This was a recording made by two Italian brothers, Giudice Achille and I forget his other name, Giudice Cordelia. They were basically ham radio enthusiasts in Italy, in Turin. Yep. And because the Russian spacecraft flew across Italy, they could listen in. And being ham radio operators, they were enthusiastic. And they said, let's listen in. And they got their sister to go and learn Russian so she could understand what was being said, which she did. And they recorded all this. It was quite open. There was no secret about it. Anyway, the Americans knew about it because there was a big article in Reader's Digest about it in the 1960s. It was quite open. And they recorded one rather tragic story of a cosmonaut who was saying that she was becoming very, very hot. What's happening? I can't control the craft. Words to that effect. Basically, she was just flying off into space.
Yeah.
She couldn't get the rocket to land. She couldn't get the retro rockets to fire. And there are other stories which implies that Yuri Gagarin was not the first in space. I mean, whether he was or not is really irrelevant, but because he was certainly up there. But he was reporting seeing things that he couldn't have seen from the timing of his orbit. I mean, it gets a bit complicated, but yes, Russian cosmonauts in space, lost in space. There's quite a lot of detail about it now. It's a matter of just sort of delving into it. But yes, there are things like that. It's like the American astronauts in Apollo 1. What the hell were they doing being put into a capsule with pure oxygen under pressure? Any schoolboy will know if you introduce an ignition source, the thing will go bang, which is what happened. Yeah. It's not rocket science, it's just basic physics. It's schoolboy physics.
Yeah, they said that the odds of leaving Earth, going to the moon, coming back, like the odds of, and everything just coming together, the odds of everything going right are just so astronomical.
Yeah. So let's move it on to, let's say that if it didn't happen, how have we been fooled?
Right.
That famous phrase of Mark Twain, it is easier to fool somebody than to persuade them that they have been fooled. Now, you ask most people, has man landed on the moon? Yes, of course they have. I saw it on television. I've read the books. I've seen the pictures. I've seen the astronauts. Of course we landed on the moon. What do you mean we didn't land on the moon? Stupid man. You're a conspiracy theorist, obviously. Do you know where the phrase conspiracy theorist originated?
I know Andy was touching base on this, Mr. Thomas. He was touching base on this. I can't remember exactly what he said off the head right now, but he was touching base on this in our last interview.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was basically the JFK assassination, and the Warren Commission report, which said that Oswald was the lone gunman. In effect, that's basically what it said. Nobody else, no conspiracy, nobody helping him. Because so many people were challenging that result, that Oswald was a lone gunman acting on his own with no assistance, so many people were challenging that in order to stop this occurring, the CIA, the dear old CIA, clowns in America, came up with this wonderful idea that we could say that they were conspiracy theorists and that we could sideline them as being kooks and clowns and idiots. Well, CIA stands for Clowns in America, so they know what they're talking about. And that's where the phrase originated, in 1966, 55, 65, 66. It was initially proposed as a term of abuse for people who challenged the official story. The official story was the Warren Commission report,
Right.
which said that Oswald acted on his own. If you challenge that, you're a conspiracy theorist, obviously, because you're not accepting the official story. Isn't it interesting how many people are challenging official stories about all sorts of things?
Oh yeah. Before the internet come about, really, the internet is just a boom of just information out there. And with Google nowadays, you can go on Google and learn how to do anything, really.
Exactly. There's one other very good search engine which I use occasionally. It's called swisscows.ch.
Never heard of it.
Exactly.
Let me write it down. Let me write that down on my little notepad here.
Okay, Swiss cows.
Mm-hmm.
SWISSCOWS. Swisscows.ch.
.ch. Okay, I got it on my notepad. I'm gonna check that.
Okay.
I have a Bing. I heard of Google and Bing.
There are quite a few others. But swisscows.ch. It does the same job as Google.
Right.
But it doesn't record who does it.
Right. Keep track of all
history
and all that stuff.
Yeah, which can be a disadvantage because you've got no history. You can't go. Oh, I was looking at a site, yesterday. Can I go back and find it again? But it's basically a different search engine because the internet was originally developed by ARPA, the Department of Defense Department of Defense Scientific Research Area.
Yeah, DARPA. Yeah.
DARPA. Okay.
Wish I could get a job for DARPA. I wish I had a job working in one of those crazy agencies doing some cool scientific stuff.
Well, you can. You can go get a job on them. Sure. You probably have to have a master's degree in some weird subject somewhere.
Right.
I would say you'd probably have a lot more fun doing what you're doing now.
Well, my uncle used to work for NASA, and he used to work for Raytheon, and he passed away in 2005. He had a heart attack. He passed away, but he used to do work on their guidance systems for missiles and stuff.
Okay.
Roger Brown, rest in peace.
He would be an interesting man to speak to now, wouldn't he?
Yeah. He was into a bunch of stuff that he was into some kind of lodges and some Mason type of stuff that I didn't even know about until after he passed away. So it's a lot of interesting things I found out about my uncle.
It's a point. I think most people would agree that you should always speak to your relatives before they pass on.
Oh no, it's just that he does things like that. He see him at barbecues and functions. He never talked about none of that kind of stuff. If you try to bring it up, he would always kind of just blow it off. And he wasn't here to be talking about work and stuff like that. He was like that kind of. But he was cool. He was cool. But
yeah, well, I mean, certainly working for Raytheon, he would almost certainly have. If he was working on missile guidance systems, he would have to have signed oaths of secrecy.
Oh yeah, he used to do all kind of stuff that I didn't know about.
and most people who do that sort of work and sign those oaths are very honourable men. They will not break their oaths of secrecy, which is the point I make about Apollo. That all the Apollo astronauts, not the later ones, not the shuttle astronauts, but the Apollo astronauts, certainly the ones who went to the moon, they were all military men, except for Harrison Schmitt. But in order to be an astronaut, in fact, there was quite a lot of resistance to Harrison Schmitt. That's Jack Schmitt of Apollo 17. He was a geologist. He eventually became a senator. I think I forget which area he was, but he was in the U.S. Senate. And he would have signed oaths of secrecy. He would have had to have done so because he wouldn't have been accepted by the other astronauts if he hadn't, even though he was a civilian. So all the astronauts were military men. Armstrong was a Marine pilot. He was a very successful pilot, very, very good test pilot. but he was still military and he would have signed the oath of secrecy, which is why it is so hard to get any good information, because they will not break their oath of secrecy. They will not put America in an embarrassing position. But they put themselves in embarrassing positions. You've probably seen the Bart Sibrel attempt to get astronauts to swear on the Bible that they'd walked on the moon.
Oh yeah, I've seen that, and he got mad. I think he punched the guy.
Yeah, that was Buzz Aldrin who punched him. And in fact, Bart Sibrel has apologized to Buzz Aldrin since then. He said, I was way out of line. I got a bit overexcited. I deserved what happened to me. But he also interviewed Al Bean, who was on Apollo 12. And he was asking him about the Van Allen radiation belts. And Al Bean said, I don't think we went far enough out to go anywhere near them. This is from an astronaut who's allegedly gone to the moon.
Yeah,
What?
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And then he was told, well, the Van Allen belts, they start at about 500 miles above the Earth's surface. So you must have gone through them if you went to the moon. Oh, well, of course we did, yes. Oh, yes. And then he started talking about the little fireflies you see in the eye, which isn't, you'd think he would have been briefed on it. But the other point about that is that if the radiation in space, which is known to be dangerous, I mean, the number of times NASA have said it, I've counted at least half a dozen of them that NASA have said that radiation in space is dangerous to humans. They've said it. You'd think that on the Apollo craft, they'd put a Geiger counter on board to see what the levels of radiation were measuring as they passed through them. You'd think they'd do that, but they didn't. There's no mention of them at all in any of the transcripts. There's no reference to radiation at all. It's as if they never went anywhere near them.
Yeah.
And then,
say, when the astronauts came back, they had to be quarantined for a while, like separate for like a week or 15 days, something like that. The capsule fell in the ocean. They just picked it up like it was nothing. They like they weren't even scared of it. Try to,
Well, why be scared of a few rocks that you just picked up in Antarctica? It doesn't make any sense. There's an interesting. Do you remember seeing the story of the moon rock and the Dutch Museum?
You talking about the moon rock? I actually touched a piece of the moon rock at the Smithsonian. Or is it either the Smithsonian or the National Aerospace Museum? One of the two in Washington, D.C.
There's a piece of moon rock.
Nice. But how'd you get that?
Good point. Interesting question.
The piece that I touched, it was so small. It was literally like maybe a 2-inch by 2-inch square. And because so many people had touched it, it was like so smooth, like glass. But that was the way I was in like the 8th grade.
Yeah, there's a piece of moon rock in the Science Museum in London. And it's a piece of moon rock because there's a big label on it that says moon rock. Right. So it's got to be true, isn't it? I mean, NASA wouldn't lie, would they? No, there's an interesting story about that piece of moon rock. I say it's a piece of moon rock. Can you prove it's not? Anyway.
Right. I get where you're going.
I was doing a talk about 20 years ago in London about all this stuff. And after the talk, this guy comes up to me and says, you might like this. And I said, what is it? He said, well, it's a piece of moon rock. Now, I don't know if you remember, about 20 years ago, the moon rocks, alleged, are kept in a filing cabinet, or they were at the time, at Johnson Space Center.
Right.
Named after Lyndon Baines Johnson, who did it. Anyway, and they were all stolen one day. This guy walks into the place, the room there, and he put it on a trolley and just hauled it out and put it in his car and got away with it. Couldn't believe it. And he started trying to sell them on eBay. So he got arrested. Obviously, they got the moon rocks back. But I wonder if they got them all back. So that's possible. But I mean, it looks like what most people would assume a piece of moon rock looks like. Could be. Who knows?
No, never know.
But
with all your different research and topics that you are into and on your website, has anybody ever tried to shut you up or threaten you? Any visits from Men in Black or anything crazy like that?
No, they haven't. And the reason for that is actually quite straightforward. Because I'm so well known, I've been doing this for 25 years, talking about Apollo. I started, so long ago I was using an overhead projector. I don't know if you've ever seen an overhead.
Oh, yeah, we used to have those in school. I wish I had one now, just so I could put something cool and project it up onto the wall.
Well, I started with an overhead projector. I mean, that's how long ago it was. There's a film on YouTube of me actually using an overhead projector and some slides to do the talk.
Yeah, we used to do math and geography, all kind of stuff like that in school back in the day.
Yeah, same sort of thing. So my view is that my protection, if I need it, and I don't know that I do, but if I need it, it's because I'm fairly high profile.
Yeah, if something happens to you, then they'd be like, oh, here comes conspiracy theories.
he was telling the truth. Look, they've taken him out. He's telling the truth. Oh, look, we never went to the moon. So it's not worth their while. So if NASA are listening, hi guys, nice to see you.
Yes.
Come and ask the questions.
Yes, I support. Now it's about an hour and a half away from me. Hour and a half north.
Really?
Yeah, I go there from time to time. I went there not too long ago, and we just went around looking at some rockets that they had standing up. We were just kind of sightseeing a little bit. We go camping a lot around, and I'm into jets and.
Wow.
I see I got a little jet over here. Oh, in that little room. My little jets. I'm into jets and stuff.
Oh, that's great.
I
Yeah.
got all kind of stuff in my room here. Like I got pictures of jets over there from air shows.
Yeah.
In my garage here, this is my studio. This is my wall. Have you seen some of the episodes?
Oh, wow. Look at that. Look at that.
Time clocks and records.
Yeah, records.
That's my ode to Doc Brown from Back to the Future with all the clocks.
Oh, right. Oh, wonderful. In fact, I
like your background too. Like you got all research documents and all kind of stuff behind you.
Yeah, I have, yeah. It's the back issues of Nexus mainly, but the books that we sell and all the magazines. In fact, hang on, where is it over there? Is it there? See that computer there?
Yes. Old school.
It still works today. It was the original computer. It was the original computer we bought when we started the business 26 years ago.
Nice.
It still works today.
Is it an Apple with a Mac?
It's an Apple.
Apple, nice. That computer is probably worth like $5,000 right now.
Well, they're worth it. We got about half a dozen of them in the office here.
Those are worth a lot of money on eBay to collectors.
That's a point. Maybe if it ever it stopped work. It stopped working about 5 years ago. It stopped working one day. I couldn't get it to boot. Couldn't get it to do anything. Couldn't switch it on. And we phoned up a few people who might know, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's the battery. The clock battery needs to be replaced every 5 years." Right. Wow. So we went out and bought one for a few pounds, a few dollars, stuck it in. It's been working ever since.
Amazing.
Yeah.
They say the technology they had to go to the moon back in the day was like equivalent of what we have on like a calculator, which I don't know how true that is. I don't know. There's some interesting, talking of that, it's the Apollo guidance computer you're referring to there. The Apollo guidance computer is what was produced by MIT to guide the craft to the moon. But the point is, it wasn't an autonomous computer. It could only react to commands put into it. Now, a friend of mine who's about to write his second book, a guy called Randy Walsh. Now, he's the chap you should speak to. Lives in Toronto. He's written a book called The Apollo Moon Missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight. Now, he's a pilot. He's a flyer. He understands about navigating across distances. That's what pilots do. In the old days, they used to follow roads and rivers and landmarks that they could see on the ground. Nowadays, obviously, you're flying too high for that. So you have to use radar and computers, and you fly completely differently. Apollo didn't do that. Apollo had a computer, yes, the Apollo guidance computer, but it couldn't actually do anything by itself. It had to be told what to do.
if you remember when the Apollo craft allegedly took off from the lunar surface, the lunar lander was in two parts, the ascent stage and the descent. The descent stage had the rocket to slow it down with, and the ascent stage, where the astronauts were, the bit on top, had a rocket that wasn't gimbaled. It was just firing. It was on or it was off.
And I have a question about that I'm going to ask you in a second.
Okay. In order to ensure that the craft could take off, and because if you fire a single rocket, it's like balancing a pencil on your finger. You can do it, but you've got to make sure that the thing stays upright. Anyway, if you fire a rocket, you have to have, they're called, anyway, there are 4 little thrusters around the craft which fire, supposed to fire to balance the craft as it takes off. So you've got the thruster going, because if it was just firing the single big rocket underneath, it would start to cartwheel. And then it would crash, and then it would all die, and we would all be very sad. So in order to stop that happening, they have these little thrusters either side of the ascent stage. There were 4 of them around it, and they could
stable.
Yeah, they would stabilize it, and they could fire either up or down or sideways, left or right, up or down. And the Apollo guidance computer was supposed to do this. When the astronaut input a command, the Apollo, the computer was then supposed to fire these rockets, these little, I mean, they weren't very strong, but they were enough to balance the craft. But this guy, he's called Hunchbacked. He's on YouTube. You go in there, he's examined, he's a computer scientist himself. He lives in France. And he's examined the Apollo guidance computer's plans. He understands plans laid out to describe how a computer should operate. And he said they couldn't do it. They weren't firing it correctly. The thing would have crashed. And look, this is why. And he actually goes into it. He's worth checking out. So again, that's another anomaly. The Apollo guidance computer doesn't appear to have done it. Randy Walters looked into one of the other major anomalies of Apollo, which is the Saturn V rocket. He says, now, in the research he did, it's now quite well known, there was a film taken of the launch of Apollo 11 by an IBM scientist who was sent there. I think he worked for Raytheon, actually. I forget what his name is. It doesn't really matter at the moment. But he filmed with a Super 8 camera the whole 3-minute of the Apollo 11 Saturn V rocket launch takeoff until it disappeared from sight. 3 minutes. So that film has been authenticated. It wasn't sped up. It wasn't slowed down. It was a genuine piece of Super 8 film. And it showed exactly what happened. The whole time that rocket was taking off and disappearing from sight. It disappeared from sight after about 40, it was about 40 miles up. So you can time where the rocket is at any given point in its flight. And it is known from looking at the weather maps what the weather was at that time on July the 16th when Apollo 11 was launched. And there was a high level of cirrus cloud. Cirrus cloud is that sort of wispy, almost translucent cloud. And that's at 25,000 feet.
Right.
He timed how long it took the rocket from the time of launch to the time it cleared the tower, which is 10 seconds, to the time it actually got to the cirrus cloud. And you can see when it gets there because the sun, which is obviously above the cloud, casts a shadow of the rocket onto the side of the cloud. So you know exactly when it reached the cirrus cloud level, 25,000 feet.
Right.
It's supposed to have taken 25 seconds to get to that point on the official timeline.
That seems too fast to me.
It took 78 seconds to reach that point, which meant the rocket wasn't going fast enough to reach Earth orbit. It has to be going, if it's got a certain weight, you know, it's like saying, you know, a Ford Fiesta or a Ford Escort, a small Ford car will get from 0 to 60 in say 10 seconds. Okay, a Ferrari of the same weight or similar weight with a much more powerful engine will get from 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. Right. It's the amount of power in the engine that makes the difference. Nothing to do with the weight. The acceleration is due to the power produced by the engine. Same with a rocket. There is a certain amount of power required in a rocket to get whatever weight is being carried. Most of it is the fuel, but it's carrying a certain weight. We're told it's 130 tons of payload into Earth orbit. If the rocket isn't going fast enough because it is not powerful enough, because there isn't enough power being produced by the 5 Saturn V rocket engines, the F1 engine, then it cannot have reached Earth orbit. In which case, what the hell was it doing? If it wasn't in Earth orbit, where was it? Bottom of the Atlantic.
I was going to say.
Which is where Jeff Bezos found it.
Flew out of sight and fell in the ocean somewhere, probably.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. No, go ahead. You can go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
But I do have a question for you. I got it.
It's certainly worth checking out Randy Walsh. You can contact him by email. Certainly worth getting on a show. He's knowledgeable about that aspect of it. He's just producing his second book. What I was going to say at this point was Apollo 13. Mm-hmm. What happened on Apollo 13? Right, the official story is straightforward. We all know Tom Hanks. Mm-hmm. Houston, we have a problem, that sort of thing. And it was all very suspenseful, and it was wonderful. They all got back and nobody was hurt. But what actually did happen on Apollo 13? Because if what we're told happened, an oxygen tank exploded, that's the official explanation, because of a short circuit on one of the electrical circuits feeding the motor that stirred the oxygen. A piece of solder had got in and short. Anyway, that's the official story. If the oxygen tank had exploded, Newton's first law of motion must be applied here. For every force, must be an equal and opposite force. If there's no opposite force, there was an explosion in the on the Apollo 13 command module, wouldn't it have gone somewhere else? Because that explosion would be like firing the rocket.
Yeah.
They didn't need to correct the course. All right, they're going to go around the back of the moon and come back to Earth using the lunar lander as the lifeboat. And then we have this ridiculous story that they're so cold inside their craft. They're shivering. Hang on a minute. What's the temperature of a spacecraft in space? You've got the sun, the radiant energy of the sun hitting it. It won't be cold, it'll be hot.
I guess they maybe think because there's no atmosphere to heat up. I don't know the scientific ins and outs.
There is an atmosphere inside the spacecraft. That's the point.
That's true. You know, I want to ask you, that famous footage of like the lunar module sitting there and then it blasts off up and, barely going back to Earth. That footage, I always thought, like, how did they have a remote camera set up to perfectly stay on target when it was lifting off and everything? And did they even have like a remote camera to even do that? Like, something just never sit right with me about that footage.
Well, okay, the story behind that is that there was a camera on the lunar rover. It's a remote camera. Well, I mean, we can get into being a remote camera in a minute, but there was a television camera on the lunar rover. That's how we're told that sequence was filmed. That was Apollo 17, one of it taking off. They tried filming Apollo 15 when there was also a lunar rover with a camera on it, and they couldn't get it. They tried it on Apollo 16, and they got a bit of it, but they didn't do it. There's a guy at Houston who was operating the remote camera. I forget his name, Ed Fendel, I think his name was. And he had to make sure, because obviously it takes 1.3 seconds for the signal to reach the moon and 1.3 seconds for the picture to come back, so he knows what he's got it right. So he has to delay his actions, or he has to advance his actions by 2.5 seconds.
Right.
So starts filming before the thing takes off. Anyway, aside from all that, we then got another problem. How was the picture transmitted from the lunar rover? And what power would be required to transmit a television picture live from the lunar rover? Did it have enough battery power? It had just driven around the moon for about 20 miles. It didn't have the ability to recharge its battery. It had no solar panels. They were only basically car batteries. They weren't anything special, because electric cars don't actually go very much further today. Well, maybe a little bit more now if you've got a Tesla. But most electric cars will do about 30 miles on battery power alone.
So people say you've seen like some artifacts above it, like strings or whatever, and like, you know, after they enhanced the film and stuff, see like something yanking it up. It's as far as.
Oh yeah. But don't. All right, come back to the film I mentioned earlier, Smoke and Mirrors, or Make Believe Smoke and Mirrors. It's 2 hours 44 minutes. The original film. There's a problem with the original film. It's a very, very technical film. It shows a lot of detail, but the narrator says at the beginning, "I'm going to disguise my voice." The trouble is, he disguises his voice so well that you can't understand what he's saying. Several people have now taken that film and have deciphered what was said and have subtitled it, so you can understand what is being said. And it's on various websites. It's been archived onto various websites. So that's the only place you can find it. It is a very sophisticated piece of filmmaking. Now, if it is even halfway decent, halfway correct, they were using a huge model set, about 200 foot across. Right. That is not difficult to do.
Oh yeah, Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah. If you've got somebody with the caliber of Douglas Trumbull or John Dykstra, who did the Star Trek and Star Wars special effects, if you've got somebody of that caliber, they will get it right, and you will see what you expect to see, and that's what you do. There are so many anomalies surrounding this whole Apollo farrago. You know, it was a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise, which was entirely successful. It achieved its objective of demonstrating to the world that America had the technological capacity to land on the moon, not once, but 6 times. That was what won the America the Cold War, because fairly soon after that, basically, the Soviet Union imploded. So it was a very successful foreign affairs exercise. But was the landing real, or was the story of the landing the success of Apollo? The film, there's a film, you could tell my memory's got so many things in it, I can't get them out sometimes. It was the one with Michael McConaughey in it. Thank you. Hang on. Where's mine?
I was just playing with my little. What you got there? Little Jeep. Oh, the Rover. I need one of those.
Four-wheel suit. Yeah. Yes. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. Anyway, he's going off into the future, and he's going to do all sorts of things. And he used to be, and his daughter is at school, and his daughter's not behaving very well, and she's talking about the Apollo moon landings as a historical event. And basically the school says, well, of course, we've had to alter all the textbooks because we now know that they didn't go. And he said, what do you mean they didn't go? Oh, it was a propaganda exercise. Very successful, but it was a propaganda exercise. No, they haven't been to the moon. I was going to mention about Apollo 13, something which not many people are aware of. Apollo 13 was launched April the 11th, 1970. 50 years ago, last weekend. That was when it was officially launched. And it did all its thing, and it had this wonderful rescue, and everybody was very pleased, and we all on tenterhooks, and we all prayed, and we all did whatever. And they all got back, and everybody was pleased, and it was successful. Okay. The day after the launch of Apollo 13, the official launch of Apollo 13, an Apollo command module was recovered from the Bay of Biscay, which is off the coast of Spain, and between Spain and France, Bay of Biscay. An Apollo command module was recovered by the Soviet Navy. It was then taken by the Soviet Navy to Murmansk, which is a northern Soviet naval port on the north coast of Russia. 6 months after it was taken there, it was handed back to America, who sent the US Coast Guard cutter, the South Wind, to collect it. Because space law says that should any artifact be identified and recovered by a nation other than its owner, it should be returned to its owner. So it was returned to America. It was taken back to America, and that capsule is now on display in Michigan, in Grand Rapids, a museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But it's sealed until 2076.
What?
Why is it sealed? This is...
See, that's what I'm talking about. They make it like so blatant. Like
it is blatant, because somebody at this point will be saying, oh, no, that's not right. The Apollo 13 command module is on display in Kansas, or something like that. I'm not sure where it is on display, but the alleged official Apollo 13 command module, which obviously was recovered because the astronauts came back in it. But what was this command module doing in the Bay of Biscay? Had it been reported missing? No. It was coincidentally recovered the day after the official launch of Apollo 13 by the Soviet Navy. Obviously, this would be rather embarrassing. It was empty, obviously. How did a command module... There are plenty of pictures of it on the US Coast Guard cutter South Wind. There are pictures of it in Murmansk. There are pictures of it with Soviet sailors who recovered it. There's nothing secret about it. If it's, as officially described, a boilerplate capsule, i.e. a practice capsule, BP-1227 it's officially described as, why didn't anybody report it missing? Because these things aren't sort of, turn them out half a dozen at a time and it doesn't really matter what happens to them. The boilerplate capsules that existed, they were used for practice. They dropped them into the sea or Florida and practiced recovering astronauts from it. Yeah, of course they were. So what the hell was it doing off the coast of Spain and France a day after the launch of Apollo 13? Is this a coincidence? Or is there a point at which coincidences become mathematically impossible?
Trying to think what would be the reason to keep it locked up until that date so far in the future. Like, what would be the reasoning behind that? Which would, it's technology, but it's so old. It's so old technology. What would be the reason of trying to keep it to, you said 2076?
2076, which happens to be the 300th anniversary of the founding of the United States, but that's probably a coincidence again. But the point about this is
strange going on Planet X, people.
Yeah. But supposing, all right, let's just extrapolate a little bit. Supposing, and this is extrapolation because I can't support it with facts other than logical conclusions.
Yeah, we can only speculate.
Supposing all Apollo missions were launched, as we saw with Apollo 11 and all the rest of them. Supposing they were all launched, and after, let's say, 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, the rocket disappears from view because it's just gone so far. And where is the information coming from at that point? It's coming from NASA. They're the only people who have access to it. There's no independent evidence of what happened after the launch and the rocket disappeared from view There's no evidence beyond NASA telling us. And NASA tell us in incredible detail what happened. They'll come up with all manner of things, but no Apollo command module, let alone the rockets, carried black boxes. So we have to rely on telemetry. What's happened to the telemetry? They lost it.
Flight data recording.
Yes, flight data. You know, it's what happens if an aircraft crashes. You get the black box.
Right.
Well, the hell they didn't make the plane out of the material of the black box, because they all survive. But that's one of those jokes. Black box is recovered. The telemetry data inside it can be analysed to see what actually happened. Doesn't happen on Apollo. There's no black box on Apollo, so we have to rely on NASA. But they lost the telemetry tapes. Whoops. How do we know what happened? Well, we're telling you what happened, so you've got to believe us. No, I choose not to believe NASA. I need evidence and supporting facts, scientific corroboration. And as you said earlier, with the internet now, one can examine all this evidence. When I started 25 years ago, there wasn't an internet. I had to go out and buy sets of postcards. I had to buy books to look at the information. And this is one of the books I bought. Oh, hey, look at the size of it. It's a three-volume book called Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin. It's a great book.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that before somewhere.
Yeah, but have you ever seen this one? Whoa! Look at the author.
No. But yeah, of course the picture famous, but not that book. No.
No, it's a fantastic book. It's got some great photographs of it, and then there's the Full Moon, again by Andrew Chaikin. It's a great book. It's got some wonderful photographs in it. And so I started that way. I didn't start on the internet. I started using hard copy. I started looking at that, and that's where it all began. So if I could find that sort of evidence using photographs, original photographs, published in books, some of them 50 years old.
I was going to ask you, that was one of my questions, but we kind of went off talking. I was going to ask you, what made you get into doing this type of research? Like, what was the spark for you that made you really start questioning things? Okay,
good point. Yeah, maybe we should have started there.
It was one of my questions. Like I said, we just went off. It's
okay. Awesome. When I was 19, I was asked a question in a job interview. It was a very ordinary job. It was in Birmingham in the UK. And the question was, it was right at the end of the interview, the question was, what is the one thing that you have accomplished in this lifetime that you're most proud of having achieved? I couldn't answer the question. 6 months later, I was driving to India in a Land Rover. I spent a year teaching in a school in Calcutta. I took a lot of photographs. I came back to the UK. I went to college to study photography, the technical side of photography. I didn't need to be told what to take, what pictures to take. I knew what I wanted to take. I just wanted to find out the technical side of it, how films work. This was the mid-60s. So it was all film cameras, Hasselblad cameras, Nikon cameras, Canons, all the basic cameras. I got a great grounding in the technical aspect of photography. Move forward to 1990. I'm attending a lecture in Glastonbury. Where else? There's lots going on in Glastonbury other than the music festival. That's held about 5 miles outside the town. And I was attending a talk there, and they were talking about megalithic architecture or something like that. And they were showing a lot of pictures on the screen, and I happened to mention the Apollo photographs. And he said, well, of course they weren't taken on the moon, you know that, don't you? I thought, what's he talking about? Because you can tell I'm old enough to have been around when they actually did land. I was living in London and looked out the window and waved. Nobody waved back. So I thought, well, I better check this out, because how can he challenge some of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century? So that's when I went out and got the photographs and started looking at them and bought the books and started looking at the magazines, listened to the interviews. And the more I looked at them, the more I realized there were problems. There are some very famous photographs. There's one of Apollo 11. It's a photograph taken by Neil Armstrong of Buzz Aldrin walking down the ladder of the lunar lander. It's a series of 8 photographs, which I discovered by using the internet. So I find all 8 of them. And they were taken in a period of 3 minutes. Now, that's not a problem. Of course you can take 8 photographs in 3 minutes. But the camera that was being used, the Hasselblad camera, had no viewfinder. Okay, it's not a problem either. You can take photographs. Yeah, that's right.
Chest. Mm-hmm.
It was mounted on the chest, yeah. But it had no viewfinder, because you couldn't use a viewfinder if you were wearing a spacesuit, because you couldn't get your head down to the top of the camera.
Right, with a big helmet on, right?
You've got the helmet on, so they took the viewfinder away. Basically, they took the mirror away. That's the thing you hear. You know, when you press the button, take a photograph, mirror goes up. That's the click you hear.
Great.
The shutter button on the Hasselblad camera is on the front of the camera. It was made a bit bigger. It's about 1 inch square, but you couldn't see that from inside the spacesuit. So how do you know you've taken a picture? Because there's a little dial, a little counter on the side of the Hasselblad camera, which counts each picture you take. But you can't see that from inside the spacesuit either. So you've got no viewfinder, you can't see the shutter button, you don't know if you've taken a picture, and you have to focus it and set the aperture and the shutter speed by hand, manually. It's not an automatic camera. Most people have never used anything other than an automatic camera. You know, click, and it focuses it and gets the right exposure. On the moon, no, it didn't have any of that. It had you had to set the aperture ring, that's the f-stop. You had to set the shutter speed ring, that's the 150th, 160th, 125th, 250th. You had to focus it by hand.
Wow.
With your armored gauntlets. But you hadn't got the viewfinder to see if you got it in focus. Yeah. Right. So you've got all these restrictions of use, and you've got the temperature, the vacuum, you've got all the problems of space, and yet some of the great, and they're very good photographs. I've looked at virtually all of them. There are 5,771 taken on the lunar surface by the 12 astronauts who allegedly walked on the moon. And some of them are mistakes, some of them are duplicates. Most of them are pretty good. The ones we see are the ones which are the better ones.
Right.
But there are some which are just impossible to believe were taken. The famous one of the footprint on the moon, you've probably seen that, you know, the ribbed footprint. How did they take that photograph with a camera mounted on the chest? Oh, they took the camera off the chest. A Hasselblad focuses, the closest it will photograph is 3 feet. If you look at the photograph in detail, which you can do on a 4D screen, a 4K screen, you can see where the focus starts, and it's very well focused. But how did they get it that accurate? And they only took 1 picture. Most photographic technique would be to take lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures and hope you get one right. No, they didn't. They take 1 picture.
Crazy. With the advances in the telescopes and lenses that they have, I wonder if anybody's tried to focus in on the flag on the moon.
You can't. There's no telescope. Even the Hubble Space Telescope isn't powerful enough. It won't resolve down to that detail. But the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, launched in 2009, was sent to re-photograph the lunar surface yet again. You know, you'd think they got enough photographs of it by now, but no, they sent it up again to re-photograph the lunar surface in detail. And guess what? Photographed the lunar landing sites.
I think I did see something about that, but I didn't pay too much attention because the photographs that I see from memory, I don't know.
You're quite right to doubt it. Now, I'll tell you why. Because these photographs of the lunar landers, and they've now got photographs allegedly showing all 6 lunar landing sites, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17.
I gotta look at those again.
The only reason you know that they are Apollo 11, let's say, is because NASA, God bless them, put a whacking great arrow pointing to a blob.
Right.
And if you enlarge it, you get a bigger blob. You can't see a thing. Now,
Why did
I subsequently discovered that those photographs were taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter orbiting the Moon, and the orbit it took them at was at 25 kilometers above the lunar surface. Like 25 kilometers, so 15 miles above the lunar surface.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think you'd get more detail, wouldn't you? Now,
especially with the new technology and cameras. Yeah.
Yes. Now, the equipment used on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, we're told, can resolve an object as small as 0.4 of a meter, i.e. about 2.5 feet. 0.4 of a meter, less than 3 feet. Less than 3 feet. Okay. I went searching around to find photographs taken of London by a satellite orbiting the Earth.
Right.
And there are plenty of them around. You can find them quite easily.
They say they can zoom into like a license plate.
Well, that's the CIA explanation for how they can track people. But you can find commercial satellite photographs, and I found one of the London Eye, because it's quite a well-known feature in London. And it's taken obviously 450 miles above London, because that's where it's orbiting. Because you get the details of its orbit, and it can identify an object the same resolution as the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photographs, 0.4 of a meter. I thought, well, they're a good comparison here. So I get these GOI-1 satellite. That's the name of the commercial satellite, GOI-1 satellite.
Mm-hmm.
Of the London Eye, and you can identify individual cars because it's got viewing cars on the big wheel, and just a little bit distance away is a car park for people parking their cars who are going to visit the London Eye, and you can see in these cars if it's got a sunroof or not, so you know which way the car is pointing, and it's quite distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
You can see individual people walking around. You can't say what they look like. You can see that they're people because they're casting a shadow. If you look at the alleged photographs of the lunar landers on the moon taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter from 15 miles above the object through the clarity of space, through the vacuum of space, i.e. there's no distortion, you can't see a damn thing. Literally cannot see a damn thing unless NASA put a big arrow pointing it saying Lunar 11 lander. See, it's rubbish. It's photoshopped.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about them photoshopping UFOs out of pictures and stuff.
They may well have done. They may well have done, because if you can see the origin of that is in the Brookings report, 1960. Brookings Institute were commissioned to make a report to NASA on basically what to do if we identify extraterrestrial life. And the answer was, don't talk about it. Don't mention it. That was the answer. The reason was because it would upset people so much. Well, possibly it would. I mean, maybe that's a reasonable conclusion to reach in 1960. But is it a reasonable conclusion to reach in 2020? I don't think so.
Like little by little, they've just been giving us more and more and more and more. Just so I guess it won't be a shock factor when something significantly. Yes. I mean, but even the UFOs flying over the White House, 1968 or 69, something like that. Maybe I'm off with the year. Yeah. That famous image of those things flying over the White House.
It was 1952, I think that was.
Yeah, see, I was way off. 52, that's back in the Eisenhower days?
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And saying we made this treaty with the aliens, they're going to give us technology if we let them do experiments on people, and who knows? All I know is a lot of strange stuff.
It's possible.
We can talk about this stuff for hours and hours, believe me.
I know. It's a fascinating subject, and because so many people are now as fascinated as you are, as fascinated as I am. I mean, you're obviously a different generation to me.
I would be 50 in 4 years, telling my age. But yeah, I've been on the planet for a few decades. I'll probably be 46 in June.
I'll be 70.
Yeah, ever since I was a little kid, I've just been loving this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'll be 78. Well, I was 78 this year.
Awesome. When's your birthday? Just
January.
past January. Okay, happy belated birthday. God bless you. Many more.
Yeah,
You are sharp as a tack.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, that's even after having had a stroke, you see. It's not bad.
Exactly. You must be taking turmeric and all types of good stuff.
Of course I am. All the right things.
Turmeric. I got to get some more. I run out, but I've been trying my best to stay on top of things too.
Yeah, no.
I need to get more exercise, though. I really do.
Exercise. Yeah, it's always a problem when you're so busy researching and so busy doing things and talking to people like yourself. It's great. I love it.
And I thank you so much for being with us here today. I know we ran way over the time, and I really appreciate it. So I'm definitely gonna. If you would like, I would definitely like to get you back on for a future episode, maybe, and then maybe I could get another topic, and we can try this because we went on so many different topics. Maybe I can get you back on. I would love to have you if possible. Absolutely.
I'd be delighted to do it. We can talk about ancient Egypt as well, if you like. And
oh my gosh, the pyramids. I used to bring up ancient Egypt. Hold on, I got something I'll show you. Oh, hang it up over here on my wall. Check it out. I just show you.
What's that?
I got this at a craft fair in St. Augustine, Florida. It was just like a sidewalk fair of a bunch of vendors, but apparently they said that this was from some wood in Africa, and they made an ankh. An ankh.
Yeah, that's great.
Ancient Egypt symbol is like little wood beads.
Yep.
Every now and then I wear it, but usually I just leave it up on my wall.
Yeah, it's very nice.
A lot of pictures of the ancient carvings on the pyramids where like they be holding the ankh. I wonder like what they used to like. They held it a lot in a lot of pictures. Like it was a device or something. I don't know.
Could well be.
Nice. Nefertiti.
Nefertiti. Yeah, she's lovely.
I was just looking at a statue in I think it's in a museum in Cairo. Without her, she didn't have the head hat on, and it was just like her head was big, like it was an elongated skull. It's like two stone carvings.
Yeah,
her.
Yeah. Oh, there's some fantastic things in the Cairo Museum. I was fortunate to be able to go around it.
Oh my gosh!
With John Anthony West and David Childress.
All over the world, man. You're like real life Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
There's an interesting display in there of boomerangs in the Cairo Museum.
Right.
What the hell are boomerangs doing in the Cairo Museum? They come from Australia, don't they?
That's
so
the
question is, could the Egyptians have sailed? Could they have taken boats from Egypt to Australia? And the answer is yes. If you look at Google Maps and look at just north of Giza, i.e. in Cairo, and go to the right towards the Suez Canal now, there is another canal. You can see it on Google Maps quite easily. It's called the Sweetwater Canal. And it connects
down.
All right. It connects the Nile. It connects the Nile to the top of the Red Sea. So it's perfectly possible to take a boat from Giza across the Sweetwater Canal into the Red Sea, sail down the Red Sea, round Arabia, follow the coast of India, go up India, go down the coast of Malaysia to what's now Singapore, cross over to New Guinea, and from New Guinea to Australia is only 50 miles of open water.
Wow.
And there is the famous Gosford Glyphs, they're called, which is north of Sydney, which have hieroglyphic carvings on the rocks in this place. It's called Gosford. Hieroglyphic carvings which recount a story of a voyage by Egyptians who got shipwrecked because they didn't know about the Great Barrier Reef. They got shipwrecked, so they were trapped in Australia, but they'd come from Egypt.
Wow. Holy moly.
There was connections between Australia and Egypt going back thousands of years, hence the boomerangs.
Yeah, they even said they found some Egypt artifacts in like the Grand Canyon over here.
Yeah, they did. Yeah,
that's like top secret.
Yes, no, they've been
somewhere.
In fact, one of the best stories of that is from David Childress. That's why you should ask him about.
Yeah, and I even in the Bible, like I've heard like people mention things about like King Solomon. Apparently, he had some type of flying machine. King Solomon, he had some type of flying machine where he could fly all over the planet. Who knows? I don't know.
He may well.
Pyramids all over the planet, like a big grid. I mean, we could go on and on and on. And hopefully, I got to get you back on. But Mr. Marcus Allen, I would have just thank you. I thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for inviting me. It was Andy Thomas who suggested.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Thomas, Andy Thomas. Yes, we started talking about the moon landings a little bit, and he brought you up. And then I've been sending invites out to people, and I'm so happy that we were able to get you on. I thank you and salute you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the effort you're making and where this will reach. You don't know the effect you're going to be having with this.
Yes, this is going to be archived up on the internet forever.
Yep.
Lord willing, if I can live a long time or not, when I'm gone, if the internet's still up, my kids and their kids, they can say, hey, look at great granddad when he was talking about that stuff. That's why I'm leaving this archives for the generations and people just to think deep about these subjects that definitely don't get enough attention, in my opinion.
I think your grandchildren will say, look at granddad, look how much he didn't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I'm still constantly learning.
Yeah.
And,
it's important. And it's also important that your grandchildren, no, you haven't got them yet, but the younger generation is open to this type of inquiry. They should ask questions.
Exactly. I got one more question for you, because we are on the Live from Planet X podcast. Oh, what type of music? Because I'm into music myself. What kind of music do you like to listen to? Do you ever just zone out, as we say, to any? What are your favorite things to listen to, music-wise?
There's such a variety of music, from Pavarotti singing Nessun Dorma, which is one of the great arias of the 20th century,
nice.
to the ambient music, Enya, maybe some of the earlier stuff. You can tell I'm a slightly different generation. I was growing up when the Vietnam War was around, so there's one particular song which I recall from that period, Eve of Destruction.
Okay.
Very interesting. It was recorded in the mid-1960s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So things like that, and also Johnny Cash.
Oh, yeah.
I was got
a couple of his records down there.
Yeah, well into Johnny Cash, and then I saw his final recording, the famous Nine Inch Nails song that he did just before he died. Some the impact that he had, the impact that Elvis Presley had.
Right.
Elvis Presley had a major impact. The fact that
in the 60s, that was like the whole Motown era over here.
Yeah. Motown was
Reflections of by the Supremes. That's a classic song from like the Vietnam era.
Oh yeah. It's songs like that which basically created the generation that I grew up with. Because we were so violently opposed to that type of military adventurism that things had to change. There was no way we could allow that sort of thing happen. 58,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam. 3 million Vietnamese died.
Yeah, and I was just watching something on one of the shows I'd be watching on Netflix, where they were saying that they might have found some type of distress signal out in the jungle somewhere, where I forgot exactly what they wrote, but it was some kind of distress signal that pilots could see from the air to let them know that someone was down there that was captured, maybe a POW. Like to this day, there could be people who just never got rescued. And
that's true.
All kinds of stuff,
Yeah.
forgot what the symbol was. I just can't think of it. It's like some letter and numbers or something. I can't remember.
There were certainly some very strange things went on in the Vietnam War. Very strange things. Many of them have been depicted in some quite impressive Hollywood films. The Rambo films were part of that.
Yeah, Full Metal Jacket and
Full Metal Jacket. Now there's another film that has just been. I've only just seen it. It's called Out of Shadows. Out of Shadows.
Or in the movie Hamburger Hill. I remember that one.
Yeah, but this one, it's on YouTube, Out of Shadow. It's a remarkable depiction of how Hollywood and the press manipulate opinion. How do Hollywood do it? The films that are produced in Hollywood are done as a result of almost direct orders from the military. Portray it this way.
Right.
So people are manipulated into believing certain things. Why do we think the way we do about Russia? What is it about Russia that is so frightening? Why are people frightened of Russia?
Yeah, I don't know. I never could understand why some like people on the planet, they just want to be better than someone else or be in control of someone else. I think this planet, with everything we have on it, with all the intelligent people that we have on the planet, we really could have a great planet if we all just got along and solved our problems. I think the world could be a great place if people weren't so arrogant and wanting to be. Let's face it. No one is going to live to be longer than 130 if you're lucky. So like money, all that stuff doesn't mean anything. You can't take it with you. The only thing you can just leave is good deeds and knowledge for people to advance and not go back. I don't know. It's just my opinion.
No, I think you're in the right direction. You're in the right ballpark. Yeah. Because that is what you speak to anybody, and they would agree with you. Of course, that's what we should be aiming for. So why didn't we achieve it?
I don't know. There's so much friction. I don't know.
Well, check out. That's what QAnon is about. QAnon is about basically trying to inform people about what is going on, not frighten them. But some of it is very, very frightening. Some of it is very dark. Yeah, and there are individuals around who are very dark individuals who do unpleasant and nasty things.
Yeah, okay. Let's keep our God armor on.
Yes, it's important just to keep going and to say what is good. You could make the argument that, say, the Apollo missions were a fake is part of that ridiculous side of it. But unless we get the truth about it, if it's so easy to send 9 missions to the moon in the 1960s, and for 6 of them to have landed on the moon, how come we've never been back? What's all that about? Why haven't we been back? If it was so easy back then with the technology, they were all designed with slide rules, not computers.
Yeah. Always wondering, like, the things that they supposedly did get back, why wasn't there more public eye on artifacts and more just overwhelming, undeniable evidence and things? It just seems like a lot of money to waste on bringing back some rocks and something that's more going on there.
Yeah, that sums it up very well. It's a lot of money. Right. Yeah. It's in today's terms, it's about $160 billion. Not a great deal. How much did it cost America to fight and not win in Iraq? $6 trillion. There
you go. And that's a whole other subject there.
And on September the 10th, remember that famous statement by Donald Rumsfeld?
About the Treasury.
Yes, there's 2.3 trillion we can't account for. Whoops.
Then they were saying that might be going into like black budget programs and who knows, skunk works and all that kind of stuff, and those underground bases and all that kind of stuff. Who knows?
Well, somebody's got to pay for them. But don't forget one thing about money. we talk about budgets, we talk about lots of people, it costs billions of dollars to build this and build that. Every single dollar of that budget pays somebody's salary. It doesn't build a rocket, it pays the people to build a rocket.
Yeah.
It always pays somebody's salary. So, to be honest, Apollo was successful because it meant that they were building rockets for peaceful purposes, not to go and bomb the crap out of somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, they had planes to do that.
Yeah, I think soon, who knows? I mean, I can't predict the future, but I can definitely see if we got our society, humankind together, we could be like on some Star Trek, Star Wars type of civilization, communicating and interacting, sharing technology with different species of beings all throughout the universe.
Yeah, and we haven't started talking about quantum computers yet, have we?
Oh, see, there we go. As I'm saying, I gotta definitely get you back. Definitely.
There you go.
I don't want to hold you up no more.
Okay, Robert.
I think I'm gonna take a pause. I salute you again. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and
thank you,
ladies and gentlemen. Again, Mr. Allen, go ahead, plug the people your website again, your social media links, how they can get at you. And like I said, I'm going to put all this in the description and the video below. Click like, give me a thumbs up if you like what you're hearing, subscribe if you like, but enjoy.
Okay, very simple. To contact me, there are two places you can go to. One is nexusmagazine.com. Just go to the contact section, write me an email, say you heard me on Robert's show.
Awesome.
And the other one is Aulis. That's AULIS.com. That's Apple Uniform Lima India Sierra. Aulis.com.
Yes.
Go on there, contact details there, and that will give you days and days of reading about this whole subject. The Apollo 13 mystery, the whole moon base, why haven't we been back to the moon, written by some very serious researchers, some of them from Russia. It's translated into English. Some Russian cinematographers who are looking at, there's one particular sequence where they looked at the Mythbusters program where they showed how the Corsic could have been easily taken, and the Russians tried to recreate the Mythbusters program, and they found the only way they could achieve it was by cheating, basically, using white coats to reflect enough light into the subject. So all that is on the Aulis website, aulis.com or nexusmagazine.com, and you can contact me there. I'd like to hear from anybody who doesn't agree with me, does agree with me, has information, has comments to make. That's what this is about. It's communication. So thank you, Robert. I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you again.
Okay.